Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 138 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor, show by show, from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we are here. It's 2025, what I'm sure will be a wonderful year for everybody. So much to look forward to.
I've never been more excited for a new year. We all know that everything's wonderful in the world and nobody feels desperate or scared about anything, right?
Yeah, and hey, Matt, there's lots of wrestling to be excited about. All those wonderful streaming platforms, always something to watch.
Yeah, even wrestling, there's absolutely nothing to be worried about. Everything it's all good news all the time, just like in politics and all other forms of current events, war and peace. The world has never been a more harmonious place, and wrestling has never been more popular or successful in all sides. Right?
Yeah. That's the good thing about podcasts like this, though, which is allowing both the people that make it and the people that listen to it to escape into the comforting blanket of nostalgia and just go back to a time in their life where they were happier, where nothing bad happened in 2007.
Yeah.
And you just avoid everything.
Really, 2007, one of the least tumultuous years in professional wrestling ever. It was all bliss and joy from beginning to end. Look it up, folks, if you don't know.
Wrestling got a lot of mainstream coverage that year, and
they did.
This controversy creates cash.
Yeah, listen, wrestling was the featured topic on this program it's a news program. It's called Nancy Grace. It was highlighting wrestling for weeks and weeks at a time. Obviously wrestling was on a real hot streak at that point to be covered so much by one Nancy Grace. But yeah, it's funny because I think we once even got like a message saying that someone was listening back to our first episode of 2020, and we were talking about how crazy the year was going to be. And, I don't think that we meant it the way it happened, but it was a crazy year. And I feel like every year just continues to be crazy. Maybe not every year is linearly crazier than the last, but we're on a craziness arc that things get progressively more insane as the years go on. And goodness gracious, who knows what this year will bring? I feel like it's almost impossible to predict the insanity that continues to happen in both the world and in our little fandom world of professional wrestling too.
Well, Matt, let's enjoy the nostalgia for another 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, because this is early 2007, before the shit really hit the fan. So I feel like we can be vaguely nostalgic. This was a time when we could ignore that WWE was ramping up their big hype to a major event where featuring this guy who used to be pretty famous named Donald Trump. He was a rich guy who put his name on stuff, and then he had a reality TV show, and that's all that ever came of that guy. And
he was in Home Alone too.
Yeah, that's why I don't have nightmares about him right now.
While we're on the depressing subject, I thought speaking of Chris Benoit, which everyone loves when someone starts a sentence like that. But I was thinking about this the other day because I knew that we're not going to have to talk about it much, but I imagine we will get to a point this year in the 2007 timeline where the Chris Benoit things happen, and we will have to at least probably acknowledge it because it does affect, Gabe Sapolsky regrets booking a certain main event that involves lots of head trauma, in part because it then airs after the Benoit murders, which puts a new focus on the effects of repeated concussions and stuff. But I was thinking about this the other day, in part because I thought, well, we're going to have to talk about that a little bit down the line. And I thought it's another one of those things that's making me feel old. Like, a big thing that made me feel old was that feeling of some years ago where it was like, oh, there are now people that are adult age that were not born when 9/11 happened. Like, it is like me hearing about Pearl Harbor or something. It is just they can hear the people talk about what a big deal it was or the JFK assassination, but they didn't live through it. And the Chris Benoit thing, nowhere near 9/11. But for wrestling, like I was thinking, I don't think we're getting to the point where there will be almost people adult, and I don't think people will realize like how insane a time that was in 2007. Like how dark wrestling fans were for a time. Like people saying, I don't know if I want to watch this anymore. Like just the
Yeah.
reporters having to cover it. And the feeling like, is wrestling even going to be okay? Which granted, in the grand scheme of things, not the most important part of that story.
Some of us were kind of mournfully wishing it wouldn't be okay, because we were so angry about what we had done. I mean, I guess we'll I think I'll have a lot more to say about it when we finally get up to the period where all that stuff happens. But I will say I've been watching, wrestling recently, and it does make me sad, and not to burst our little nostalgia bubble that we have going on here, but makes me sad to see modern wrestlers kind of forgetting some of the lessons and going back to some of the more dangerous acts that a lot of us felt were maybe not necessarily responsible for what Chris Benoit did, but things that were involved in the performance of wrestling that didn't help, like unprotected chair shots to the head and aggressively hard headbutts in matches. And I feel like we're seeing a little bit more of that in recent times than we had been for, over a decade. Doesn't make me feel too good about it.
Yeah, I guess that's the sad nature of humanity, right? Where like when something really bad happens, we all get extremely careful about the consequences, and then slowly, if that bad thing doesn't rear its head again in a really public way, it slowly ebbs away over the years. We start getting a little more.
Sometimes not even that slowly.
Yeah, Yeah, welcome to what we just billed as the comforting, warm blanket nostalgia podcast. Where
there's no chance, Trevor, that anyone thinks they're going to be listening to the two of us speak, and the words comfort or warm blanket crosses their mind. They know that they are in for several hours of neuroticism, and we're proud to be entering into almost our ninth year of neuroticism coming up. So thank you for joining us. We promise to continue to be anxious and insane.
And I've definitely already kept true to that, within just a few days of the year. But so first off, a couple news bits that happened between the last show and this show. They're both related to both ROH and TNA. One's short, one's long. First, we'll go to a little clip I found from Dixie Carter, then the head honcho of TNA wrestling back then, with an interview she did with the Monday Night Mayhem radio show. I found a recap of it, and they wrote this up in the recap. Dixie did wish to clear the air on something discussed in depth among the wrestling fans throughout the world, their relationship with ROH, with Samoa Joe leaving and the rumors of the fallen angel Christopher Daniels finishing up soon. TNA has a working relationship with Ring of Honor, she said. Many of their guys have started here, continue to work there, and she hopes to keep seeing it for a while. And by a while, a handful of shows. But maybe she was not completely aware of what was going to happen. But we are in a really interesting time period for Ring of Honor in the TNA relationship where Joe's finishing up on the weekend we're starting with this episode. The word had already gotten out in newsletters, as they acknowledged there, that Daniels was going to be wrapping up. And it was almost this feeling of, before ROH publicly announced the pay-per-view, which necessitated all of the TNA being pulled out from Ring of Honor for good, there was this feeling of like, we were in this weird nether realm of, well, like, is Homicide going to, what about Homicide? What about, Aries and guys like that? Like, are they going to stick around, or are they going to be the next to go in a month, 2 months, 6 months? Like, how is ROH going to book them? And we'll get a more definitive answer in a few shows.
Yeah, it's going to take a while for all that to clear up. But you already see several of these wrestlers in a kind of storyline limbo. Not Aries, but pretty much everyone else that you mentioned.
Yeah, especially Homicide and Daniels also. I mean, Daniels, again, already announced he was finishing up, but definitely had that feeling of, once he lost the tag title, like, well, we got you booked for a few more shows. We'll find something for you to do, and then goodbye. But that brings us to a longer story that's mostly TNA related, but does have a little bit to do with this show. And I thought it was just a really fascinating picture of where Samoa Joe's career was at this point, a kind of a crossroads for him. And, obviously this double shot we are starting to cover here on this episode, big moment in Samoa Joe's career. So this is from the Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer's recap of the episode of TNA Impact that aired on March 3rd, so just a few days before the show we're covering tonight. And it was taped on February 26th, to a show about a little less than a week before this show that we're covering tonight. And also, I believe they taped the next week's Impact on the same night, which will come into play in the story. So this is from Dave's recap. Samoa Joe pinned Abyss to the wall and basically told him to stand up for himself. Tomko then pinned Joe in 6:52 in a match, much of which was also taken up by a commercial break. This was the best Tomko match I can recall, which is a testament to how good Joe was here. Joe set up the Muscle Buster, but Christian interfered with a belt shot while Earl Hebner was stuck in the corner and somehow missed it. Tomko used a lariat and it was 1-2-3 in the middle. Joe came back and had Christian in the choke, but Scott Steiner made the save. At one point when Steiner was pounding Joe, who was on the ground in the corner, one of his punches connected hard with Joe's temple. All of Steiner's punches were stiff, but the one in question looked real hard and to a bad spot. Joe was knocked silly and was woozy for a long time. There was talk of taking him to the hospital right away because he was showing symptoms of a concussion. However, Joe was booked in several segments on the second show, which was largely built around him as the go-home show for a pay-per-view he's headlining. Plus, he was in the Trio's main event for that show. They kept delaying and stalling, hoping his head would get clear. They even taped explosion matches before finally doing the Angle and Joe and Rhino versus Christian and Tomko and Steiner match. After Joe was beaten down by Steiner, Christian, and Tomko, Christian finished the deal, laying Joe out with an unprettier. Abyss then made the save. Then Abyss gave Joe a black hole slam to end the show. So your kick-ass babyface got his ass kicked 3 times. Although I'm sure people will publicly deny it, the word we have is the booking team is very unhappy with Joe's remarks on ROH show a few months back about hurting his knee tripping over some bad booking, and this job and being laid out was done as punishment. He also may not be getting the title. Getting beaten up once can be heat, but more than once in the same night makes the face look weak. Also, you can only do it once, and Joe's loss in the Iron Man match recently to Kurt Angle, which did make sense, was his loss. If Joe is going to win the title, which at least when he lost to Angle was the plan, and eventually still is the plan, it sets up Joe versus Angle again, which can at least headline a pay-per-view. However, Joe doing the second job to Tomko trivializes his important loss to Angle. Worse, more people would have seen the Tomko loss on TV since such a small percentage of the viewers are buying the pay-per-views these days, down to less than 2% of the TV homes that watch Impact buy the pay-per-view, which is just a horribly low figure, and it's not even a surprise that's the case when a television show is written primarily for comedy. And then Dave ends this by saying, anyway, they are digging a deeper hole each week.
See, my big takeaway from that is this really was a pre-Benoit world when clearly, like, the big story from that should be, like, that they were trying everything they could to make Joe be able to work when he clearly had a bad concussion, like, and all the other stuff I feel like, it's bad, but almost beside the point.
Yeah, like again, this is something we could talk about when the Benoit thing comes up, but yeah, I think the biggest change from the Benoit stuff before and after, you see it, like you just said, in stories like this, where, some people act like, people act like no one knew concussions were bad before the Benoit thing. And of course, that's not true. We all knew concussions were bad, but we didn't necessarily know all the effects. And people in wrestling, a lot of times in wrestling, they saw it as something you could work through, that it wasn't quote unquote as serious as like a knee injury where you literally can't walk. Like, oh, if your brain's foggy, we'll work around it. And yeah, like I think this is the big change in wrestling, where if this happened 2 months after the Benoit murders, I don't think you'd be having a story where a wrestling company goes, one of our stars has a concussion, we want to tape another match with them. Let's just try and buy him an hour or 2 of time and see if he clears up long enough. And but for that matter, he's here wrestling in the UK for ROH less than a week later. So yeah, that would change a lot in wrestling within a few months. The other thing I thought was interesting was it was an interesting part of Joe's career because in one sense, TNA was getting what they wanted. People, there had been on and off throughout ROH and TNA's entire history stories of like some people, maybe not everyone, but some people in TNA resenting that ROH, got favorable comparisons to TNA. Sometimes people would say, oh, the talent that those two companies share, it's better used in ROH. Sometimes the people that were in Ring of Honor and TNA were seen to be more enthusiastic in media interviews about Ring of Honor. And, something like the Joe comment, which we covered, where he said he tripped over some bad booking on the way to the show, and that's why he couldn't work a Ring of Honor show. I can understand if you're TNA why you would be really mad at that, but it's weird in the sense, it's a weird position for TNA to be in where they're punishing Joe, but by punishing Joe, they're also like punishing themselves because they're actively hurting a guy who had just drawn the best pay-per-view buy rate they ever had recently with Kurt Angle, who was one of their top stars. And we covered like a few shows ago, Meltzer said, in The Observer that he thought the plan was for the pay-per-view that TNA was promoting on those TV tapings for Joe to beat Christian in the main event to become the TNA World Champion. And in fact, that does not happen. Joe would end up becoming TNA World Champion, but it would be over a year after this. He wouldn't win it until April 13th, 2008 at the Lockdown pay-per-view that year. He beat Kurt Angle in a 6 sides of steel title versus career match. And that's the only time, and I think Joe spent, 10 years in TNA? That's the only time he ever holds the TNA World title. He gets like a 6-month run, and that's it. So it's a really interesting time in Joe's career where he's saying goodbye to you'd hope go, bigger and better things for him. Okay, now TNA can really get behind him because, hey, he's not going to divide his loyalties between this other fan favorite company that he's even more associated with. And instead, they just kind of punish him.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a surprising stat when I hear it because I watched TNA and followed it a bit, but not closely enough to realize that Joe had only briefly held that title in 2008 and wasn't multiple-time champion, because he is thought of as like one of the main icons in that company through the second half of the 2000s. So it's just weird to see like what the priorities are of TNA at that time. Also gets me thinking about modern companies and who they do and don't make champion. I mean, I don't want to get into it because I feel like that could be a whole tangent that, I don't know. I wouldn't listen to this show to hear people talk about modern wrestling companies, so I'm not going to do that to the listeners, but it just makes me think about some parallels.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the show we are covering tonight, which is the 5th year festival, Liverpool. It took place March 3rd, 2007 at the Liverpool Olympia in Liverpool, England, in front of a reported crowd of 1,300 fans. So, Matt, there was a question going into this show and the next show that happens the next night that I wanted answered. And I did some digging, and unfortunately, I haven't yet really got an answer. Like, first, I feel like to kind of explain what I was trying to find, I need to kind of recap the story of ROH going to England for these solo promoted shows, which we covered on the shows last year in 2006. But for people that do not remember everything we've done or are just tuning in now, I'll just go into it quickly. Most of this comes from the Last Stop Penn Station podcast, which is a show former ROH owner Kerry Silkin did with Ian Riccoboni that did an entire episode about the 2006 UK events. But sadly, it doesn't seem like they did one about the 2007 UK double shots, but Kerry touches on a few things there. And the story Kerry gives about why ROH went to the UK in 2006 and came back in 2007 was that the idea of ROH running in the UK wasn't their own. It was brought to them by British wrestler / promoter / British guy, Alex Shane, who came down for, I believe, the Joe versus Kobashi shows and then went to ROH and sold them on the idea of, hey, come to England. I can help you set up these shows and run these shows. And so ROH went in 2006, and on the first night they ran, like they're doing on this show, they ran the Olympia in Liverpool, and they did 1,400 in the Olympia last year, which is a great crowd for ROH. 13 or 1,400, that's a great crowd for ROH at this point in history. I mean, up to this point in history, I would say that's only beaten or matched by some WrestleMania weekend shows and some of their New York shows now in their new larger building that they just upgraded to, or maybe like Final Battle 2003, but even that had a bunch of those tickets were comped. And then the next night in 2006, you might remember, they ran in Broxbourne, and Kerry on the podcast wondered why Alex had him run there, because that building really only held like 500 fans. So even if they sold it out, which the Observer claims they did in 2006, it wasn't really financially profitable for them to run there with all the travel costs and everything. So here we are in 2007, And on that same Last Stop Penn Station podcast, Carrie noted that like the first trip they made in 2006, it didn't make money. The airfare was big. They had to pay the Olympia owners a flat fee for the building, and they also had to pay Alex Shane a percentage of the draw for helping them run the shows or like set up the shows. But on other episodes of the podcast, Carrie has also mentioned that other than the WrestleMania weekend 2006 shows, they never turned a profit, at least before DVD sales on a show. So anywhere during his tenure as owner. So, Kerry left 2006, the UK shows, basically saying, like, boiling it down to our experience in 2006 for the ROH UK two shows was it would have been impossible for us to have made money on those shows unless they had sold through all the merch we brought. But also those shows weren't financial disasters for us either. So we decided to come back. And so here we are. RH is back in 2007 for another 2 UK shows set up by Alex Shane, with the big difference being that instead of running night one the Liverpool, which reportedly seats 1,700 fans, and then Broxbourne the night 2 in a building that seats 500, they decide just to run 2 straight nights here in the Olympia. And according to the attendances, at least that the Observer give, which even though we know are not always correct, we just stick with those to be, at least it's a consistent comparison point against itself. It paid off for them this year because, according to the attendances, last year they drew 1,400 in the one night they ran in Liverpool and 500 in Broxbourne. In 2007, they run 2 nights in the Olympia in Liverpool, and they draw 1,300 roughly each night. So,
I should also mention, right, Broxbourne, that's right outside of London. So it's like they did this time did not run the biggest market in the UK. They were going to. They said that. They said they would come back to both places, and they eventually just stayed in Liverpool.
Yeah, and I believe that was one other selling point that was given to them why they ran in Broxbourne was like, well, it's right close to like in London, so you'll be quick to get to the airport, afterwards. But obviously, RH decided, what's more important, selling a lot of tickets, and so selling 2,600 over 2 nights is significantly better for a company the scale of Ring of Honor than the year before when they sold 1,900 for 2 nights. So you would think like, all of this should point to a success that warrants RH returning to the UK again, right? Like if 1,900 tickets over 2 nights in 2006 was enough to get them to come back for 07, you'd think 2,600 tickets over 2 nights should be enough to get them to come back in 08. And in fact, I vaguely remember on an episode of our show over the last few months where I read from one of the newsletters mentioning that ROH's plans in 2007 were to run 2 double shots in the UK in 2007. And I found some review of a Ring of Honor show recently when I was just doing some other research that made it sound like the original plan was for RH to return to the UK in October for the shows that ended up being held October 5th in Boston and October 6th in New Jersey, which makes sense when you realize the show that happens October 6th that ends up being run in New Jersey features Nigel McGuinness winning the RH world title, which you would think if you were penciling that in long term, that would have been a show you would have loved to have in the UK, right? Nigel winning in his home country. But instead of all of that, not only does Ring of Honor not return to the UK for a second double shot in 2007, RH does not run the UK in any form again until 2014, which is the first of 2 straight years. Preston City Wrestling promotion in the UK runs shows that were branded as PCW/ROH Super Shows of Honor, where they sent some talent comes and they kind of brand it that way. It's not until 2016 where RH does a 3-show tour that they billed as Reach for the Sky, where RH really ran a solo branded, like real legitimate ROH series of shows in the UK again. And so I thought to myself, like, why did that happen? This is an ROH mystery to me, Matt. I wanted to know. So we know part of the story, which is Alex Shane ended up striking up a partnership with TNA, and lo and behold, in 2008, TNA does a UK tour that Alex Shane helped set up, including they run, guess what, the Olympia in Liverpool. So in that sense, that's obviously a big part of the story there. But the part that's a mystery to me comes from comments Kerry made on that episode of the Last Stop Penn Station podcast about the 2006 UK tour, because he talks about how Alex Shane he calls him a guy that was always looking for an edge. And without saying in too many words, he seems to imply that Alex Shane was perhaps shifty and maybe played in ROH in some way. And he says, when we do an episode on the ROH UK 2007 shows, I'll tell the story. I'll expand on this. And Matt, I don't think they ever do a show about the ROH 2007 UK shows. And that podcast is now sadly defunct. So that is, the chances of that happening are very low unless they revive it just for that. So I tried to do some digging. I asked a few different people who I thought might know if they had any details on this. I asked a friend of the show, co-host of the An Honorable Mention podcast, former ROH talent and office employee, and future author of a book about Ring of Honor, Shane Hagedorn. And he told me, and I'll quote him directly just to make sure I don't mess anything up on wording. He just wrote to me, I know about it. I know about it was Alex Shane setting up a TNA. I know it was about Alex Shane setting up a TNA deal, but I'm under the impression it was in response to ROH deciding not to go back. I also don't believe we ever said we were going back. So now I'm even more confused at this point, Matt, because now I'm like, well, didn't ROH even really plan to go back?
Well, I just for my part, I follow pretty closely. I don't remember there ever being any kind of like announcement that they were going back, like publicly at least.
But then, Matt, I found a live report from a fan that attended a Q&A ROH ran the night of the show, which we'll have a few little recap bits shortly of this 2007 show. You know, it happens a few hours before they run the show we're covering tonight. And he describes running into ROH booker Gabe Sapolsky and Gabe outright telling him that ROH would be returning to the UK. So, you know, if ROH was telling at least one of the major news sites that, hey, we're going to run twice in 07, like two different sets of shows in 07 in the UK, they're telling a fan like hours before they run a show where presumably they know what the ticket sales are going to be, like, hey, you know, we're going to come back, and then they don't come back. It was a mystery to me. I asked some other people. They didn't have an idea. So I am now putting out the call to the Through the Years listenership, the deep vein thrombosos. If you have any more details of if ROH had planned to run a second time in 2007 or didn't, possibly in October of 2007, or especially if you have any knowledge of why they never returned after what you think would be an encouraging, you know, attendance, even though I know probably with the logistics, the financial stuff is different when you have to pay for all that airfare overseas. But if it had something to do with Alex Shane, it had nothing to do with Alex Shane, email us at throughtheyears@gmail.com, through spelled THROH, because I'm hooked, Matt. This is the kind of nerdy, dumb stuff that probably very few people care about. They got me. I'm hooked. This is an ROH mystery. Couple more bits before we get to the show. Gabe Sapolsky talked to the Observer, and he said, Gabe Sapolsky noted on the same day his singles title will be defended in Japan and his tag title in England, as new champs Mark and Jay Briscoe will make their first defense of the title against the Dragon Gate team of Naruki Doi and Shingo. So, yeah, actually, we won't be covering the Morishima Kenta match until the next show, which is just, we'll briefly talk about it, but because I think technically it happens on the next day, although with time zones, probably it did technically happen the same at night. But that's an interesting little trivia bit. And finally, Matt, before we get to the show, I just picked a few notes I thought were interesting from PW Torch reader John McKay. Wrote in about attending ROH's UK Fan Slam signing and Q&A. This is all things he wrote. He wrote, quote, "The crowd started forming around noon to get into the Olympia. It took about 35 to 45 minutes to get in due to the fact that the wrestlers were in a small hallway signing autographs. The following were there: Colt Cabana, Delirious, who actually spoke, Jimmy Rave, Matt Sydal with Dragon Gate belt, Shingo and Naruki Doi, Jimmy Jacobs, looking incredibly emo with blood tears marked on his face, Allison Danger, Homicide, he spelled it as, with Julius Smokes, the Briscoe brothers, Roderick Strong, Davey Richards, BJ Whitmer, and Nigel McGuinness on the end. Past the hallway was a relatively large open room where the Q&A session was held, with rows of chairs set up and a bar in the background. They were filming this, but I doubt it will make the DVD because you can barely hear the questions and everyone is walking right in front of the camera repeatedly. Hopefully they can salvage some parts of it to put on the DVD. I will note, to the best of my knowledge, they do not. Finally, there was a merchandise night with your typical stuff and Samoa Joe sitting to the left of it. Some quick notes and observations from some of the Q&A. Jimmy Rave and Jimmy Jacobs. Rave made sure to say that people should think about their questions prior to asking them. A fan then asked about how Jimmy the wrestler has changed after the embassy. Rave thought this was a dumb question, so a fan responded with, quote, "How does it feel to have no friends, Jimmy Rave?" unquote. Rave and Jacobs then hugged. When asked about the future of ROH, Joe really put over Nigel McGuinness. When asked if he would win the NWA title, Joe said he would, and this poor fan, Joe McKay, wrote, "You'd have to be foolish to think Joe is not winning the title in a week." And then we get to the Gabe Sapolsky part. Gabe Sapolsky was hanging out by the merchandise stand and fielded some questions from fans. He noted that even though they did not sell out, they sold more as opposed to last year since both nights were in Liverpool this time and the Olympia holds more. He also noted that they will be back in the UK. Some people were worried considering they had not sold out both nights. Gabe was really cool and a total class act that would even let you take a photo with him! Exclamation point. I like that he's like shocked that Gabe Sapolsky would let someone take a picture with him.
Only class acts do that.
Shingo and Naruki Doi were pimping Dragon Gate t-shirts. A few Dragon Gate representatives were also in attendance, but I did not get any names. And then finally, he writes, a lot of people complain about Roderick Strong's mic skills, but let me tell you, the guy is just a man of few words. I asked him how the flight was since it is long, and all he said was, I slept and shrugged. Hey, I'm not bashing the guy. Just remember that when you see a Strong promo.
Sounds like you're bashing the guy.
Yeah.
Roderick, this person's bashing you, just letting you know.
And speaking of Roderick, we opened the DVD with Roderick Strong backstage, picking up from the cliffhanger that ended the last show, where Roddy promised to reveal who attacked Jack Evans backstage a few shows ago. In news I am sure will shock and amaze all of you, Roddy reveals that he was the mystery attacker. So that is one hell of a cliffhanger.
Do you find it silly that they made this a cliffhanger at all?
This feels like one where they just decided because they want this conceit of the 5th year festival that every show ends in a cliffhanger. Like, we need a cliffhanger, but like, they literally have the guy that's like, next episode, I'm going to tell you who did it. And then like 5 seconds to the next show, it was me. I was like, what a thrilling cliffhanger. Roddy says right up there with like the reveal of the Black Scorpion, great stuff. But Roddy says the truth is he never liked Jack. He used him as his doll to make his name in tag team wrestling. Roddy says tonight when he makes the FIP title a world heavyweight title, he'll show you what he does to men like Jack when he breaks Pac in half, which is a nice little unintentional rhyme.
For the record, are we calling him Pac in this review, or are we calling him Pac, which is what they called him in ROH at this time?
I don't even know at this point.
Were they just calling him Pac because Americans didn't know how to pronounce it? Because I'd like to hear a clip of him saying his own name from 2007. Because I feel like every American promotion called him Pac in 2007, but I guess it was probably wrong.
Yeah, it is just. Is it because of? You know what's weird? I was saying, is it because of X-Pac? And then I said, wait, do I say X-Pac or X-Pac? And then I thought, oh, no, I say X-Pac. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, if you ever start saying a word enough times to yourself, it starts sounding weird. Like I'm starting to now doubt the pronunciation of all things Pac. Tupac. Matt, I'm losing my mind. We have to keep going.
I'm gonna vary back and forth between saying Pac and Pac just to confuse everybody.
We will be consistent about not being consistent. But we then will get the usual 5th year festival highlight video that opens every show in the series. And then we cut elsewhere backstage where Jimmy Jacobs, dressed in a suit, all snazzy, brought a suit to the UK, sits by a brick wall. He says he flew halfway around the world to be here in Liverpool, and it was a pretty miserable flight. Well, he should have slept like Roderick Strong. But he says normally when Jimmy goes somewhere, he has Lacey right there with him. Jimmy says this time instead he had a fat guy snoring in his ear for 6 hours. That's because last week Colt hit Lacey with the Colt 45 when they wrestled in Chicago. Jacob says that night was a bittersweet night. Yes, he lost, but Lacey says it wasn't about wins, and he made Colt bleed like no one else ever has in his life. He left Colt scarred and he changed him forever, just like he said he would. Jimmy says Lacey, despite not being able to be here in England in her bad condition, told Jimmy she was proud of him and gave him a mission for tonight that Colt Cabana and BJ Whitmer, one or both of them, have to get taken out. Someone has to go home in a body bag. And then the things Lacey has been whispering in his ear on recent shows, the things that everyone wants to know what they are, they're all going to come true. So I don't know if there's much to say about that. Jimmy will get more promo time later in the night.
I mean, the only thing I'll say is stuff I would have said when we reviewed the match, which is just I always find it weird when they have a big blow-off match to a feud and then the two people, they wrestle and like cut an intense promo on each other almost immediately after. And, Cabana was like, I need to win this match to finally end it. And then it's like, oops, Colt, you're wrestling Jimmy Jacobs in a week. Sorry.
Yeah, like for those who didn't catch our last episode, it wasn't just that Colt cut a promo, like not just that they had like what was supposed to be the feud-ending blow-off match. Colt cut a promo that very explicitly said like, after tonight, I'm done with you. I'm going to be put behind. I'm not going to have to think about you anymore. And the very next show, they're running a tag match between them. So, but that brings us to Homicide, scored to the ring by Julia Smokes. Interesting that, Ring of Honor, they were prudent in who they did and didn't fly overseas on shows like this to save money. You'll note if you watch the show, they only brought one of their own Ring of Honor referees, Todd Sinclair. They did not bring the full complement. They used some British refs to make up the rest. They went the extra mile and brought Julia Smokes to the show. So Homicide, with Julia Smokes at his side, defeats Davey Richards via pinfall in 16 minutes, 10 seconds after he hit the cop killer. Matt, this was a first-time matchup for ROH, and according to Cage Match, and of course sometimes Cage Match can miss things from smaller indies, but according to Cage Match, this is not just the first, but this is the only time this match has happened as a singles match anywhere ever before or since.
Wow, I didn't realize that second part, that it had never happened even after this, but this was definitely the sort of match where like the crowd elevated it a lot. Like just like sometimes we could have a match that we say this would be good if the crowd was hotter. This match probably would have been pretty forgettable if the crowd wasn't so hot, but they were so excited to see like a real ROH opener. They were so excited to see Homicide. They got very into Davey and his heel shtick. Homicide felt motivated because of how hot the crowd was, and Smokes was there kind of pepping everybody up. They start out with a lot of character work. Homicide, hits the Tope Con Hilo. Actually, the Tope Con Hilo in this match is one of the coolest because Homicide, before he hits it, crotches Davey on the guardrail, and that's how Homicide hits the Tope Con Hilo, from like that position while Davey is crotched over the guardrail, straddling it. I've never seen them do that before. And the crowd was going nuts. Then as the match goes down the stretch, they hit a bunch of bigger moves. It's actually pretty long for an ROH opener. It's what'd you say it was? Like 16 minutes? Something like that?
Let me just go back. 16 minutes and 10 seconds. So yeah, that's lengthy for recent ROH openers, I would say.
Yeah. So it's a long one. They do a lot of stuff. It's a pretty fast-paced match. The crowd gets really into it when Richards puts a clover leaf on Homicide with the please don't tap chants going and stuff. Richards avoids the cop killer a couple times. The crowd goes nuts for the Three Amigos and the frog splash with the Eddie chants. And finally, Homicide hits the cop killer, which he doesn't always bust out, special for England, and gets the win. I thought that, Homicide seemed motivated. Richards, I think he's doing a good job. This is really only his, third match with the new character. They kept an exciting pace the whole time. The match didn't really tell a very deep story, so I thought it was a good match that was elevated to what I thought came across as a very good match because of how hot the crowd was. There was a lot of race-related banter that I don't think holds up well, like when Smokes called Richards a white cocksucker, and then Richards says, "This piece of crap Puerto Rican is dead," about Homicide. So I was like, I don't know about this, but the crowd seemed to enjoy it. The other thing that I noticed is they're doing a 3-camera edit for this show, which is super rare for ROH. Like they did it, they did it for like Cage of Death, they did it for Joe vs. Kobashi, but it's not typical. And the only thing I could think of is that just like at Unified, the hard camera for this show comes off like it's weirdly not white balanced correctly. It's a little bit unfocused, and so I think maybe they just incorporated that third camera just to have more clear shots instead of having to rely on the hard cam, which doesn't come across that well. But it does make the show stand out. And like I said, the crowd for this match in particular, really, really into it.
I'm really glad you brought that last point because I wanted to ask you about that too. Because it was really wild watching the show where on these Liverpool shows, something about the hard camera setup. It's not just what you said where it's not white balanced with the ringside handheld cams. And like you said, it's maybe a little blurry. It almost seems like a little more pulled back or further away than we're used to when we watch RH shows held in the US. And I don't know if you felt this way, but maybe it was just like what you point out, like the difference of it being a 3-camera shoot where them normally RH only does in this era, they cut together the one handheld cam and the hard cam, even though, as you will hear them, the boys on An Honorable Mention bemoan a lot, they shot with 2 handheld cams, but this time they do use both of them, like you said, it appears. Did it seem like they were trying to use the hard cam as little as possible during the show? Because I was like shocked at how much of them, like we'll get to one match later, but there was at least 1 or 2 matches where I felt like almost like they were choosing maybe suboptimum camera angles just so that they didn't have to cut to the hard cam that often.
In a word, yes, that's 100% what you said. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, this is another match firmly in the post-title Homicide world title reign of we have no idea what to do with this guy now era for Homicide. This is a match that has no reason for happening except we were told it was originally signed as a world title defense for Homicide back when he was champ, which makes no sense because Richards was and continues to be in the midst of a long losing streak, so he had done nothing to earn a world title shot. But as far as random thrown together matches go, Homicide and Richards is a fairly big one to give away. It's one of ROH's most beloved stars versus one of their big up and comers that they really thought a lot of. And Homicide, who didn't come over, like you said, he was super over here on this night, and this was a crowd that was super pumped to see all their ROH favorites in an ROH setting. So yeah, anyone that was going to get a big reaction, but Homicide kind of got double that because he wasn't on the UK tour the year before,
and he was out first also, which is a big thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you talked about there wasn't like a lot of depth to this match. I agree. Like, to me, this felt like another one of what people derisively sometimes call a video game match. It is moves back and forth and not a lot of real connective tissue between them. The way I would describe this match is the moves in this match don't really have a memory. Like, nothing here builds on what comes before other than the fact that maybe some bigger moves come later in the match because they save them for later, and maybe a very minor thing like Davey Richards goes for a running Liger bomb, it gets countered, and shortly after he then hits it. This match doesn't really have a flavor other than 2 guys doing some moves. The match isn't really fast-paced enough to kind of take your mind off of that. And I also thought the execution was just a tiny bit rough in some places, but Davey does a ton of jabbering in his new heel persona. He's talking to the crowd. He's yelling at them a lot. He stares down a little kid during his entrance. He pulls out a little bit of his goofy comedy, even when Julie Smokes is screaming at Homicide at one point when Homicide has Davey in a submission. He's like, crank it. And Davey just goes, no, don't crank it. And I thought, okay, that's the kind of goofiness I like from him. I thought in terms of the amount of action you got, I felt like they struck a good balance between trying to give fans a fair bit, but not going all out. Like, this isn't an opener that is trying to steal the show, but it's not something that's just trying to ease you into the show either. I liked what you mentioned where Homicide crotched Davey on the barricade and then hit the Tope con Hilo from that position. I thought that was cool. I thought Davey at one point just tossing Homicide from a suplex position, stomach first onto the top rope, was really impressive because he just chucked him like he was nothing. I thought, wow, like that's kind of like showing some deceptive strength there. Overall, I did not like this as much as you. I would call this like a low good. Maybe the crowd, like you said, really elevated this match. Maybe I did not take on the crowd's enthusiasm as much as maybe you did, because the crowd was really excited to see these guys and for ROH to be back in Liverpool. And I felt like they did give me enough action to entertain, but just, man, it continues to be crazy how hot Homicide felt at Final Battle 2006 and how pretty much instantly that momentum stopped. Like, if you ever want an ultimate example of a wrestler whose chase for the title was far more important than what came after for him in the booking, it's this run from Homicide. Like, it goes on off like a light switch. But that brings us to the second match on the show. Sarah Del Rey defeated Allison Danger via pinfall in 8 minutes 29 seconds after she hit the Royal Butterfly Power Slam. The Dangerous Angels, Matt, they explode here like the Mega Powers.
I wrote that too. Dangerous Angels explode. Both are entering as baby faces. That's the difference.
Yeah, and they stay baby faces afterwards. So you could bemoan that the women only got 8 minutes on a show where every other match on the card got a lot of time, or you could be happy and a little bit shocked that ROH actually brought two women over the pond to the UK for these shows, which kind of surprised me, given how short shrift ROH generally gave to women at this time. So dealer's choice if you want to be happy or sad about this. I thought for such a big stage and a relatively short amount of ring time, it's kind of surprising that these two kind of went minimal for a lot of the match. Like, it was a lot of chain wrestling holds done pretty well, and the crowd here is pretty supportive, but they're quiet at times because the chain wrestling doesn't always prompt a lot of cheers, but they cheer whenever something flashy happens. There is one fan that must have heckled because we could hear someone shout something unintelligible, and instantly they get shouted down with boos and shut the fuck up chants. I saw a live report that said there was some crowd being sexist here, so I imagine that might have been because I don't see any like loud, overt sexist chants that like at least get picked up or loud enough to be picked up over the audio system on the DVD release. But they go into more action in the final minutes. I thought was fairly good. Some of Allison's strikes and the like I often find aren't the greatest looking, and I noticed that again here. I thought Sarah Del Rey's big running boot to the midsection looks great, and I enjoyed in this match that rather than just breaking it out once like she's been doing in some recent matches, near the end of this match, she just said fuck it, and she hit it again and again. I thought that was really cool. I thought Allison Danger's cravat sleeper with the body scissors was a cool looking submission at the end, and obviously it played right into the finish where Sarah Del Rey is able to stand up while Danger's still holding that submission, and she just turns it to the Royal Butterfly into the power slam. Overall, I'd call this like a week above average. I thought it was a pretty simple, relatively unambitious match. It doesn't really do anything bad, but it didn't have a ton of memorable moments. It's most memorable just for the fact that Ring of Honor was even willing to book a women's match on a big show where they had to fly people out. But, I'm glad they did.
Yeah, on a show where they more matches than usual got a chance to try and kind of steal the show, I kind of wonder what it would have been like if these two had been told that they could do that also, especially obviously Sarah Del Rey, who was, I think at the time, considered probably the best women's wrestler, at least on the indies in America. Maybe there's some people I'm forgetting, but this match reminded me of like a house show opening match from like, I don't know, 1980. Where it was just a pure scientific match and sportsmanlike or sportswomanlike, and they're just wrestling and trying to one up the other with wrestling moves, and it never really got to a level far beyond that. I mean, Del Rey did do some cool stuff. Obviously, she often does. I liked her modified abdominal stretch, pulling back Danger's arm and taking her down. Danger's standout spots mostly involved kind of like a variety of pinning combinations, and there was a spot where she avoided a Royal Butterfly and hit a very sloppy STO, but the sloppiness kind of worked. It made it feel a little more believable. I'd say if anyone worked quote unquote heel in this match, it was Del Rey because Danger got to make the big comeback. And there was a spot where she did this like wacky body scissors cravat combo, which reminded me how popular cravats were in the indies in 2007. Yeah. And it also makes me think, how come nobody's bringing the cravat back nowadays? You feel like that statute of limitations is up. People could get back into cravats again, I feel like, in 2025. But yeah, it's other than that, it was just they went basic. They did not try to steal the show, and as a result, they had a competitive match that the crowd kind of appreciated. That was solid for what it was, but completely unmemorable. And yeah, I feel like they could have done more, and it would have been interesting to see if they had actually tried to do a little more.
Again, it's like I was saying before, where I'm kind of impressed they actually made the effort to bring them over to the UK, but it is still the classic Ring of Honor booking where we're going to give you the second match on the show, which is like the lowest spot we can give you because the opener always means something more. And we are going to give you by far the least amount of time on the show, even though it's only, I think, a 7-match show. But, that's Ring of Honor. So, we then find the Briscoes backstage who are doing another, speaking of that's Ring of Honor, they are doing another 2007 Ring of Honor promo where they're looking off to the side and not into the camera. I have been told this eventually stops. It keeps happening. I don't know when it's going to stop. I hope soon.
It's not going to stop before the 5th year festival's over. That's for sure.
So,
they should have called it the looking off to the side festival. I was trying to come up with a phrase that like rhymes with like 5th year festival, like. But I don't think I can make it work.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think I can make it work. Sorry.
I was just gonna say when I was a shy teenager, everywhere I went was a looking off to the side festival.
Aww, little Trevor. Get that confidence.
So I would say it still is, but Jay talks about how Jay Briscoe talks about how they take Shingo and Doi tonight, take on Shingo and Doi tonight, and says tomorrow they want the best team in Europe. Jay says they're holding these tag titles for as long as they want to. This is one of those classic things I love in wrestling, where plans, like in storyline, they never intended on having them take on the best tag team that Europe has to offer, but it's one of those things where it almost makes you wonder, well, in a theoretical world where they did have that match, who would they have wrestled? Because they don't have any like special UK talent. That is one thing about these shows compared to last year, where other than a couple female talents, which they'll be using on the next night show, they don't have as much of that. Well, really hardly any, like other than Nigel, who is just an ROH regular, like that homegrown. Well, I guess Pac. But it felt like last year they did a bit more.
Good job using both pronunciations, like I want you to.
But it felt like last year they took a bit more advantage of that, where it felt like this year it's like we're using Pac, and other than him, it's like it's going to be basically a little bit of a leaner roster, and it's just going to be the ROH guys, which maybe they didn't, just maybe other guys weren't available, or maybe they decided.
I think it was by design. I think they were like, I think people want to see an ROH show. We're going to bring over a bigger crew of ROH wrestlers, and we're going to give them an ROH show. That was that's my read on it, at least.
And they on the next match, they certainly gave the fans something that Ring of Honor fans in the U.S. have been seeing a lot lately, because we got a Jimmy Jacobs versus Whitmer and Cabana tag match. We had Jimmy Jacobs and Jimmy Rave defeating B.J. Whitmer and Colt Cabana in 13 minutes, 43 seconds when Jacobs pinned Whitmer after hitting the top rope contra code. So, yeah, Matt, as we both talked about earlier, Colt Cabana, poor guy, just wanted that feud to be over. Very next show, he's back in it for, I believe, one night only, but still. So, Matt, technically, this is the exciting, dramatic conclusion to the Colt Cabana Jimmy Jacobs feud. What'd you think about it?
I thought it was another match that was enhanced by a hot crowd, but I thought that overall, because we've seen it so much, it felt fairly boilerplate. To start off, I thought that Cabana seemed like he was in too good of a mood, considering he's about to wrestle one of his most hated rivals, whom he had a bloody war with the week before. He's coming out just full on, happy-go-lucky jokester Colt Cabana, slapping hands, all excited. But besides that, Jacobs and Rave at least have the appropriate tone, because they attack Cabana and Whitmer during their entrance, and they brawl around ringside, and they go into the crowd, and we get some picture-in-picture action. And there's a spot where that I thought was funny. So Rave and Whitmer are fighting like on a balcony, and Whitmer teases dropping Rave off the balcony like upside down, and Lenny Leonard goes, "The referee giving a lot of latitude here," and I'm like, he's allowing murder. That's the latitude that he's giving this match. You just dump someone head first off a balcony. Good. That's definitely He's not being strict with the disqualifications there. That's true.
Maybe he just literally meant like as far as like how much the angle at which he allows him to tilt. Like if it goes over 48 degrees, then I'm going to tell you. But you can lean him this much.
All right. That's a stretch, but a stretch in the latitudinal direction, so I appreciate it. So they're fighting up there. Rave kicks Whitmer down the stairs, so he's out of the danger of being dropped to his doom. And they take turns. They trade dance partners at one point. They take about 5 minutes before they actually get in the ring. There's a spot that gets a huge reaction, which is Whitmer powerbombing Jacobs on the edge of the guardrail, because no matter what Jacobs is doing in this era, he always takes one really outrageous bump, or at least one, I should say. And then finally they get back in the ring. And for some reason, they're still picture in picture as everyone is in the ring except for Jacobs. And we see just Jacobs like crawling around ringside in a little box.
Look, they were using both handheld cameras on this show. They were going to get their money's worth.
Yeah, it's like I could see that sort of error happening if it's like a live feed. But when you're just editing it in post, I don't know how that happens. But anyway, so they are back in the ring. Jacobs hits Whitmer with some object as Whitmer hits the ropes, and the 3-camera edit allows us to actually get reaction shots of the wrestlers on the apron, which was kind of nice. So that they work over Whitmer for a while. Cabana keeps trying to get into the ring. He gets poked in the eye, and he swings wildly. He almost hits the ref. And eventually, Whitmer gets the desperation exploder as Rave comes off the ropes and crawls through Whitmer Rave's legs, get the hot tag to Cabana. Cabana does his classic hot tag, does his double quebrada, flying assholes all around. Eventually, we get to a point where Whitmer blocks the Contra code. So Jacobs comes off the ropes and gets spine bustered and then brain bustered. And Rave saves Jacobs from the pin. Then we get to a part where Whitmer and Jacobs are fighting up top, going for super versions of their moves, and Jacobs ends up just hitting the super contra code, getting the win. I didn't expect the match to end right then and there, but kind of glad it did because I don't think it really needed to get into this like big dramatic finishing sequence. I think they'd done enough, and they were trying to set up for because Whitmer and Jacobs have a big, I think it's a Falls Count Anywhere match the next night.
Yeah.
So, like I said, fairly boilerplate stuff, but hot atmosphere. Jacobs and Whitmer, I think, showed the right amount of intensity to build up to their match the next night. So if you think about it as like a TV match to build up the pay-per-view match between Jacobs and Whitmer, I think it mostly did its job, but wasn't anything great on its own.
I would call this match pleasant enough in the sense that it's nothing we haven't seen before. It's kind of like the opener in that it hits that middle ground between not being as all out of a match as you might have hoped for on a big UK show, but they did enough and put enough effort in that it did not feel mailed in or anything like that either. The first 5 minutes is that crowd brawl. I thought it was a pretty generic crowd brawl, except for one thing, and that was the building. Like I think I've said this before, but like if you're going to do generic crowd brawls, try to explore the space of wherever you're going. Because to me, like this was one where the Olympia is an interesting looking building with a balcony. So when someone is thrown into chairs on this show, it's not the usual regular flimsy folding chairs. It's hard-backed, fancier looking chairs. When Rave and Whitmer brawl into the back of the building, they actually climb up the stairs, like you said, because the Olympia has a balcony level. And Whitmer bends Rave over the balcony rail, which, you know, is a spot that always, I wrote in my notes, makes my asshole clench. The list of spots that make my asshole clench. We'll have to go into that in a future show. But the point being,
I need to know. I need to know all of them.
Well, clearly the comedy spot where someone sticks a thumb up someone's butt. That one, obviously. I mean, that's a no-brainer. We'll have to think of the other ones. But the
spot where the person that you hire to come and hold your asshole closed does that. that makes your asshole clench.
The stink face, obviously.
Uh-huh.
The point being, like, crowd brawls to me are like one of the times in wrestling where setting actually matters. Like, give me something interesting to look at, and I can still find some entertainment even if you're just doing a generic brawl. Like, that's why I love whenever guys brawl in an indie show where it's like a hockey rink and they have the hockey boards back there. You know, I'm not, in some ways I'm not hard to please. Brawl, if you're going to brawl in a building, brawl into whatever the unique features that building has. Like, if even when you don't do anything really unique like they do here, other than that one leaning over the barricade spot, like, you know what? I enjoyed it because it was something. You know, the Trevor Dane 2025, I'll take something. That's my new motto.
I like that.
So
I'll take something too. Give us something, people. Just something.
After the first 5 minutes, I thought this match goes into the ring. It sells into a very standard tag match. The heels isolate Whitmer for a while. Colt gets the hot tag. We get a hot final minute or two. Again, nothing we haven't seen many times before in this feud. They had that nasty-looking power bomb on the edge of the guardrail that you mentioned. And I thought there was a neat little spot late, that spot late where, you know, Whitmer dodges a Jacob spear, but then the spear hits Colt instead, and then Jimmy and Rave immediately hits BJ with one of his own. I thought that was a cute little sequence. I guess you could say that the most notable part of this match was that Jimmy won it completely clean. Like, okay, he did hit Whitmer with a foreign object in the middle of the match, but other than that, they kept wrestling for quite a while. And the end is just the two of them fighting on the top turnbuckle for a while. Jimmy hits the contra code, wins, gets the pin, simple as that, which, is, I imagine they probably thought, well, he's going to be losing the feud in the end, so we can give him a clean win to kind of heat him up a bit here. Overall, I'd give this, I don't know, a strong above average. It's a match the crowd liked more than me. Again, like the first opener, I feel like they were excited to boo the heels, cheer Colt, Colt, obviously, with his UK connections, really loving the style and working there a few times. He was very over in the UK as usual. He paid tribute to Big Daddy like he did last year, where he does all the easy chants. I felt like this is one of those matches where you see the gulf between people like me who has seen this match plenty of times and the crowd, which is seeing this kind of match live for the first time. This feud, to me, was starting to hit that point, which we've talked about that a lot of ROH feuds hit, where it overstays its welcome just a little bit right before the conclusion, where it's hitting the same second to last point in the feud a little too often. Like, I feel like I've seen 8,000 of these kinds of tags between various people in this match, but
yeah, but
really it's only been like
Trevor. I will say, you said it's slightly overstaying its welcome. We've been saying this feud has overstayed its welcome for 5 months now, so I think it's fair to say it's greatly overstayed its welcome a little bit. They're just, not that the things are bad, it's just they're just dragging it out too long. It's too much of the same.
Yeah. Although the thing I always have to tell myself too, which is we're coming to this from the perspective of people that are rewatching every single show. I imagine a lot of fans, a majority of probably Ring of Honor fans were picketing and choosing and not buying every single show, including the B shows. And so, instead of seeing this tag maybe 6 times, maybe they saw it 3. And if that's the case,
but they are trying to sell every single show. Just saying, it's not their goal isn't to get people to watch all of them.
That is a good point. That is a good point. If you do what Ring of Honor is hoping you do, the dream up, then that effect does. It is a difficult problem they've kind of created for themselves in that sense. I will also say, Matt, the most important thing I want to say about this match is at one point Jimmy Jacobs takes off one of his elbow pads and he stuffs it in the front of his trunks, and then later he takes his other elbow pad off and he also stuffs it in the front of his trunks, and there becomes a somewhat noticeable bulge. And I just thought of a great idea. I want to see a comedy match where someone is wearing knee pads and wrist tape and elbow pads, and slowly, without calling attention to it throughout the match, they just start taking off everything and putting it in the front of their trunks until it just becomes ridiculous. See how long you can do that before the crowd really notices it. I just want to see everything in the front of your trunks. That's Trevor Dame 2020. Trevor Dame 2025. I just want to see everything in the front of your trunks.
All right. You know what? Good for you. I support you.
And that brings us to the best 2 out of 3 falls match. Matt Sydal defeated Delirious 2 falls to 1 in 23 minutes, 22 seconds. Sydal defeated Delirious via pinfall in the first fall in 10 minutes, 15 seconds with a small package after he hit a low blow. Delirious then evened the score. He defeated Matt Sydal via submission in 16:46 when he made him tap out to the Cobra stretch. And then Sydal won the match 2 falls to 1 when he beat Delirious via pinfall in 23:22 after he hit a moonsault belly-to-belly superplex. Speaking of matches that feels like we've seen a million times in recent months, Matt, it's Matt Sydal versus Delirious. In truth, we've only seen this match 3 times since August of 2006. That would be Epic Encounter 2, the final of Survival of the Fittest 2006, and Suffocation. But those 3 matches did happen in a 2-month span, so I would say that kind of made it feel like more. And they've been on the opposite sides of a couple tag matches since then, too. This was also Delirious' first match back since suffering that horrendous concussion against Roderick Strong, meaning Delirious had a whopping 2 weeks off from doing matches after that concussion. So, again, the unintentional theme of this show, it turns out to be concussion talk. From a live show booking perspective, I felt like running this match again here makes sense, because the typical wrestling booking thought would be, if you have a match you like, but you've done it to death in your regular markets, but then you're running a show in a new market, well, hey, you can run it again there and it'll be fresh because those fans haven't seen it live before. But going to what we just talked about, Matt, to those of us watching all the shows on DVD, not so much. So maybe the effect is dulled for me and you because we've watched them a few times now. But I will also just say I felt like this match disappointed a bit compared to some of their other matches in the series. when you see 2 out of 3 falls and all the time these two are going to get for this match, when it's the 4th match they've had for each other in Ring of Honor in a relatively short amount of time, when it's on a major show in the UK, last match before intermission, which they typically try and peak before intermission, I don't know about you, but I kind of expected them to go balls to the wall and try and top everything they've done before. And not only do I feel like they didn't top themselves, I don't even really feel like they even tried to. I also don't even feel like they even really built like on what they did before. First thing is, this is not a match that feels like it justifies its runtime. It gets off to a slow start. There's some one-liners from Delirious that get the crowd laughing. At one point, Seidel complains to the ref that like Delirious is going to kick him, and Delirious then I think says to the ref, I think he said this, correct me if I'm wrong, he was going to rape me, which gets a lot of laughter from the crowd. And then there's a weird moment early on, too, where there's a simple rope break, and Seidel grabs his neck in pain, which might have been like he legit pulled something because Delirious didn't do anything to him. And Delirious like makes note of that because Delirious in English says, "Ha ha, I didn't even do nothing. He already hurt," which again gets laughs from the crowd. But then the match gets going and starts progressing. But after each fall, the match slows down again. And that's not abnormal either. Like a lot of times in multi-fall matches, like 2 out of 3 falls matches or Iron Man matches, you'll see the wrestlers use the start of a new fall as a chance to kind of reset the pace of the match and build back up again. So I can accept after the first fall, but after the second fall, they've already done it twice. They're deep in the match. It felt like they should be hitting the stretch run of the match. The momentum kind of died instead for a little bit, and then they started to come back. And I just felt like, I kind of wish you didn't do that. There's this weird moment too, later in the match where Seidel bails to the outside. You can hear him ask the crowd, "Do you want to see something crazy?" And then he attempts to crawl into the ring like Delirious has done often in the past, except Delirious stops him almost immediately, and nothing really interesting comes from it. Like, there's no payoff to it. It's just like, do you want to see something crazy? Gonna go under the ring. Delirious, like, no, he knows what you're doing because you just said it and did it in front of him, and you don't even really get far under the ring. But all that said, when I watch these guys, I really feel like they've had a million matches together in ways that are both good and bad. Like, there's a comfort they have together that I think comes through where it feels like these two could have a match together in their sleep, but it also feels sometimes like this is a match they've had together in their sleep a few times before. It's a lot of the same stuff we've seen in their other 3 matches, maybe in a slightly different order. I'd say the one big change is Seidel at this point in his career is pretty heelish, and he wins both his falls, as I've talked about, based on cheating, kicking Delirious in the balls behind the ref's back on the first fall, and then he knocks the ref into the ropes to throw Delirious off balance as he's on the top rope in the third fall. But even there, like, as someone who really likes cocky, little arrogant Matt Seidel, I feel like I've seen recent performances from him with that there where he's been more of an asshole. Like, this is more the cheat just comes from the actions he does that leads to the end of falls. I would have liked even more of the just he's talking shit to the ref, he's talking shit to Delirious, he's talking shit to the fans. But yeah, maybe I've just seen this match too much because the crowd's fairly into it. They go pretty nuts for a late match sequence of counters, which that ends in a chemical imbalance too from Delirious that I thought was good, but nothing mind blowing. But the crowd just loses it for it. But I just felt like at the end of this match, I felt like if you want to see these two just go all out, their survival of the fittest final is superior to this. If you want to see these guys dick around and be goofy and have fun with the crowd and then do some wrestling at the end, I feel like you get more of that in their match at Suffocation. So it's kind of like not the best on either end of their spectrum. I thought this was like a flat good rating to me. I was hoping to see something great. I didn't feel like it was as close to as good as the survival of the fittest match. But maybe I'm being hard on this. I don't know. Because again, this is the theme of the first half of the show, and it will change in the second half. But the theme for me in the first half seemed to be, I thought the matches were decent, fine, but the crowd that was there clearly liked them more than I did.
So I definitely agree with part of what you said, which is, if you want to see these guys go balls to the wall, survival of the fittest is it, and they kind of set the standard there. We know what they can do, and when they don't do that, it's like, all right, you're holding back. Where I maybe disagree with you a bit is that I think this was better than basically every other match between them that we've seen in ROH, besides the survival of the fittest. Because I don't think they really went all out in any of those matches. And I think that the character work here was better than, let's say, the Suffocation match, for example. I liked the second fall the best, because that's when Seidel, I think, was like being most heelish and maybe being a little too arrogant, and it came back to bite him with him going for that top rope belly to belly, but Delirious knocking him off the ropes and hitting the Shadows over Hell in the Cobra stretch, and that got a really big pop. The first fall was very playful until. And actually, I thought you were talking about how the crowd was into it. I thought that early part of this match was actually the quietest the crowd had been all night at this point. So I don't know how exactly into the early like silly stuff they were being, but I think things got a little bit more serious when Seidel hit that low blow and the quick cradle to really establish, okay, he's actually being like a heel here, not just being a little bit cocky or dismissive of Delirious. And then that third fall, I thought it was good, but I do agree it's a little bit disappointed because, like you said, we saw what they can do when they're really going for it, and they never got to that last year where they're really going for it. And I thought they could have actually had a great match at that point if they did do that. As it is, I thought that they did a good job of keeping a pretty long match entertaining the whole time. And I think they did work hard. But it's clear they were holding back a bit, and I'm not really sure why, but it could just be that Delirious had just come back from a pretty serious concussion and maybe wasn't ready to go as absolutely all out as he maybe could have back in October when they did Survival of the Fittest. I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt there in his case.
Yeah, maybe I'm just an asshole. I didn't think about that, even though I openly started talking about the match, framing it as this is Delirious's return from a concussion, but that's actually a great point. So that is understandable. It was interesting reading live reports from this. There were some fans saying, yeah, I thought the crowd was fairly into this. Maybe, like you said, they weren't into it at the start. I thought that sequence at the end with the counters they were really into. But there were some fans saying, oh, the fans weren't as into us. And I saw one fan say it was because they haven't seen the other Delirious and Matt Sydal matches on DVD yet. And another one said it was because Sydal was a heel. And I felt like, I don't think either of those would impact this match. But I don't know.
Well, definitely Survival of the Fittest had to have been out for a long time by this point.
But I feel like if anything, that would just raise expectations that I think we both agree this match didn't meet. Where it might be good that you haven't seen them do everything before and do a lot of these spots before if you haven't seen their recent ROH work. But I do want to say, as weird as it sounds, Matt, my favorite spot in this whole match, and maybe this is just yet another sign I'm getting old, was Matt Sydal countering a Delirious dropkick by just jumping backwards. So Delirious lands on the mat without hitting anything. Like, it's a move so logical that I was like, why don't we see that more often? I guess because it was just weird. Like you never think of, oh, what to do if a guy throws a dropkick? I just take a step back.
Well, it's just like that wrestling trope of like, if someone tries to whip you like into the ropes, like just don't run,
Yeah.
But of course you do, because you have to do that or else the entire artifice of wrestling falls apart.
Also, did you notice, Matt, this is just the second straight year at the Liverpool in Olympia, the Olympia Liverpool, where Ring of Honor runs a show and the fans chant "Past your bedtime" at a loud child fan. Second straight year, the tradition continues.
Yeah,
I wonder if that was just a British thing at this point.
They should run "Tradition Continues" too in the UK and have it be about that chant. We all know that the 2003 version was basically just to subvert expectations, and that was the first show in ROH history that didn't feature man-on-woman violence. But in this case, it's about the "Past your bedtime" chant.
See, that's the real reason I wish Ring of Honor had run the UK every year for a long series of years, because I would have loved if that's the same fan every time, and then every year he gets that chant, and then one year he's like, you know what, it isn't my bedtime anymore, I'm 17, it isn't. That's long-term storytelling, Matt. So then we go backstage, it's intermission, we join Allison Danger and Sarah Del Rey. Allison tells us that we just witnessed women's wrestling at its finest. I'd slow down a little bit there.
So I feel like every time there's like a longer women's match in ROH, we get to say like, oh, I think this is actually the best women's match in ROH history. But I think actually that one was good. Was better than most ROH women's matches so far. But that was not the best women's match in ROH history to this point, because you had some of those like that 4-way with Mercedes Martinez and all that stuff. So I think we could already say, even by ROH standards, was not quite women's wrestling at its finest.
Yeah, they were starting to get a little bit more opportunities. I like that tag they had in Chicago, the show
Yeah.
before, a little bit more than you. I thought the Lacey Daisy Hayes match, even though I poked some holes in it, I thought overall that was like an enjoyable match.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
been getting a little bit. If this match had happened in like the first year or two of Ring of Honor, we'd be going, yeah, this is clearly the best
Yeah,
women's match they've had. But
exactly.
the bar has been raised. So anyway, at this point in their promo, two British female wrestlers interrupt Jetta and Eden Black. Jetta finds it interesting that the Dangerous Angels, they talk about being the best female wrestlers, and yet when they travel around the world, when they come here from the U.S. to England, they just decide they each want to face another American instead of someone from around the world. Just says that they're the best female wrestlers in Britain today, and they challenge the Dangerous Angels to a tag match tomorrow night. Del Rey says, "Bring it." The British wrestlers walk away. Then Danger says, "I couldn't understand a word they said." And then she and Del Rey then do a chest bump, which they did on their match in Chicago. So clearly, even though they barely end up doing any tags together, they had done the most important thing that a tag team must have when they start to come together, which is before you even wrestle many matches, have like some kind of signature handshake or chest bump or move. And they got that down. And then from the John McKay, that fan that was at the Q&A, he had a live report. I thought it was interesting. He wrote, "Intermission took place. Once we returned from intermission, two British female wrestlers, Jetta and Eden Black, came out and challenged Del Rey and Danger to a tag match tomorrow." So they actually shot this angle for the live crowd, and then they shot it again behind the scenes for the DVD crowd instead of just airing it in front of airing whatever they did in the live crowd on the DVD. But
Well,
either way,
you have to have noticed that I had, just as I did, that the audio for this show was even worse than usual for an ROH in terms of the house mic. Like, it was pretty muffled.
yeah, it was funny. I left this out of the notes, but this was one of those shows where right in the timeline, I think like the Torch wrote like something about how ROH has just upgraded their gear so that the sound will be much clearer and the lighting will be better. And, that may have been true on the recent shows because there was a delay in the DVDs getting out. But I just read that right before we started watching this show and was like, this is the one show of this early part of the year where because they're doing overseas and don't have all their old gifts, it is like old school ROH where the white balance, the lighting looks a little bit off. The sound quality is to the point where promos are nearly intelligible at times. Like it is old school, and by old school I mean 2006 Ring of Honor.
Well, more like 2002 Ring of Honor in some cases.
Yeah, we did not have the announcers sound like they were on a telephone for a random show so far. So at least it's not that much of a 2002 vibe. We then get a clip of How Wicked wrestling Roderick Strong from FIP's Florida Rumble. I think I did a typo and said Florida Day, but maybe that was the name of the show. Florida Rumble 2006 show that happened in December, followed by a clip of Roddy wrestling Davey Richards at FIP in Full Force 2007 in February. And that brings us to the FIP World Heavyweight title match. Roderick Strong successfully defends the title when he defeats Pac or Pac or
Pac.
the third pronunciation.
Yes. Can I just add though, like, what was accomplished by showing those clips of Roderick Strong matches? Like, was it to establish like he also defends this title actually in Florida on FIP? Like what? I mean, I'm not saying it was a big deal or like negative, but what was the idea behind showing him wrestling, first of all, his current stablemate and a guy that had never been in Ring of Honor before ever? I'm curious what the idea here was.
And did you notice that they did hear what they did when they showed those clips a few shows ago where they were using FIP footage to put over the Davey Roddy feud, which is they show a bunch of clips of guys wrestling in FIP, but they never show the finishes. Like it just feels like they're showing random spots in the middle of these matches. Like they don't show Roddy actually getting the wins in these matches. Like you couldn't show him beat Hala Wicked.
Yeah, I know. Again, like, what is the goal? What is the idea here? What are they trying to accomplish? I can't figure it out.
Well, Matt, what they did here was make the FIP a world heavyweight title because Strong did successfully defend the title when he defeated Pac via pinfall in 18 minutes, 9 seconds with the Tiger Driver. During ring introductions, Bobby Cruz, who they also brought over, goes as far as to tell the fans that because the title is being defended overseas, the FIP title is now the FIP World Heavyweight title. So they really are proud of this. Matt, we went through this but when ROH did the same thing with their own titles, with the world title and the tag title. And I just have to say now what I said then, which is it is both an adorable bit of attention to detail and also absolutely ridiculous. Like, I appreciate that they weren't just some small indie fed that was calling all their titles world titles off the jump. They felt like they had to earn it. But at the same time, the idea that any title becomes a world title if you defend it once in a second country is hilarious. Like, the example I always use is, I have sadly only been to 2 countries in my life. I would not call myself a world traveler, but this is, Matt, it is now a world title. It is Pac's Ring of Honor debut. This is the first match he will ever have in Ring of Honor, and one of only 4 he will have this year, and then he will not have another match in Ring of Honor until 2023 at Death Before Dishonor's pay-per-view, the Death Before Dishonor pay-per-view that year against Claudio in the Tony Khan era. So it is a 20-year-old Pac here that it was actually already had 3 years of experience and had been wrestling even longer if you count backyard wrestling experience. But what do you think about Pac's debut here and finally getting to see a world title match?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel strange thinking about like the FIP world title, but also like, what does it really matter, right? Well, first thing I notice is Pac is as wet as ever, just liquid, just like spraying everywhere when he moves around as he comes out. He just doused himself in water. But I would say what I noticed about this match is that it's worked, I think, differently than a match like this would be worked now, where they're trying to get over a new high flyer. In the sense that I think this match has sort of, I don't know, it's sort of old school in terms of its layout, in that really Strong dominates a lot of the match, and they build and build and build to Pac at the end, hitting a bunch of really big flying or kind of agility type moves, as opposed to him just kind of going fast paced and doing a lot of the best stuff he could do pretty quickly and throughout the match. They kind of slowly build to it. I mean, not that Pac doesn't do anything to show off his high flying ability early on. There's he obviously does a backflip when he enters the ring. He does a nice spinning head scissors on Strong early. He does his flip out of the corner after an up and over, and then arm drag Strong, which I think is his first big show of uniquely impressive agility. But a lot of the match is Strong just being a heel and dominating the smaller guy. He chops Pac hard, but also does spots where the crowd wants him to chop, but instead he just flicks him in the eyes, which I think that's a good heel move because it doesn't give the crowd what they want. It involves cheating, and it's effective in kayfabe terms. So I think that's always a good heel move. Pac does end up doing a moonsault off the apron, but Strong catches him and drops him throat first on the guardrail and then chucks his back into the ring post, which gives him the opportunity to work over the back, which makes a lot of sense given it's Roderick Strong. Pac does a standing shooting star press at one point, but Strong quickly stops him with a big backbreaker. So there's a lot of like grounding Pac. There's a spot where he back suplexes Pac on the apron, which elicits a holy shit chant. There's another spot where he basically takes Pac and he bends his back over the guardrail before slamming it into the edge of the ring apron. They're doing a lot of continuing to ground him more and more and more. Eventually, Pac makes a comeback, shows some good fire with some strikes. He kicks Strong, and Strong goes over the guardrail and tries to suplex Pac over, but Pac comes over and shoves Strong's back into the guardrail, and he ends up hitting a top rope corkscrew press, which I think is basically the broken arrow on Strong in the crowd, which the crowd, of course, loves. At one point, Pac avoids the gutbuster, lands on his feet, hits a standing moonsault, senton for 2, which might be the coolest move that he does in the ring, besides that big corkscrew press to the floor. At one point, Strong loudly calls for the Tiger Driver, and I made note, like, he's not calling it the Gibson Driver anymore. Did he just change that when he turned heel, or he dropped the Gibson Driver?
I made that note too. I thought it was crazy. Like, I was like, doesn't he always call that the Gibson Driver? And I was like, I just like, yeah, I was like, is that supposed to be him being a heel now? Because, or was that in like, that wasn't just in my head, right? That he used to call it the Gibson driver,
Well, yeah, he called it the
or at
Gibson
least the
driver.
announcers did when he wrestled.
No, he called it the Gibson driver for a long time. That's what I was wondering if this is like new. And I figure, I guess it must just be him like saying, okay, well, I'm not gonna, if I'm a heel, I'm not gonna do a heartfelt tribute to a mentor of mine, right? So like, I'm just gonna go back to calling it the Tiger driver. Um, but Pac avoids that, hits the tornado DDT, hits a 450, goes for a shooting star corkscrew splash, but Strong moves, quickly hits the sick kick, and then quickly hits the Tiger driver for the quick pin. So it was very decisive, but also a very sudden victory, and the crowd definitely appreciated Pac. Pac got over for sure. And I thought it was a very good match, and I thought Strong was doing a good job incorporating heel spots into his act. But I didn't watch this match thinking, oh wow, Pac just came out of this match looking like this can't miss superstar who gave the performance of a lifetime. They didn't really like set this up to be a big show stealing performance for Pac. It was really a display for Strong with a cool opponent who did some cool stuff, if that makes sense.
I maybe like this match a little bit more than you. For me, I felt like this was a match where just having a bit of structure and even character, well, like not even character, just like roles can really uplift a match. Like I really liked the roles that you talked about, how this match was a little bit different. Because yeah, for a decent portion of this match, it's a little methodical. It's Roddy really dominating, but it all feels in service of something. It's not your move, my move. It's Roddy kind of controlling, and then Pac getting a comeback spot here or there every minute or two. And to me, I felt like that's a structure that works perfectly for who these guys naturally were at this point in their careers. Like Roddy's offense really lends itself to him being an asshole bully. So much of it looks brutal, like when he just military presses Pac and just friggin' chucks him into the ring post, or the big backbreaker drop on the ring apron, or that cool belly-to-belly suplex pickup that he turns into a backbreaker, or of course just the chops. And like you mentioned, he had the fun sometimes teasing them and then not delivering them. And I thought 20-year-old Pac joins the Bryan Danielson club of being pasty white enough that he easily gets fairly severe looking red welts on his body all over working Roddy. And it was a trip to see, like, Pac's one of those guys where he's just so good at being like the very gruff, bearded, scary dude that like it was a throwback. Even though I've seen this match before, it was hard for me to reimagine him as like a fresh-faced 20-year-old in baby blue trunks, you know. But he is like the young underdog in this match, and I thought that did well for him here. I thought being so young and in the ROH world unknown, I thought did part of the job of telling the story that he's the underdog, in addition to just how they worked the match. And I thought he's one of these flyers with such incredible offense that he can work a portion of the match that's a bit slower, where he's not getting much offense, but as long as he does get that move here or there, the fans aren't going to lose interest in the match, and Pac isn't going to lose steam because those few moves seem so spectacular. It's like, okay, if he's hitting one move for every 4 or 5 Roddy hits, that one move is so crazy it might turn the tide. And you mentioned a lot of the cool stuff he did, like some really snazzy Rana variations, the black arrow, the red arrow, the broken arrow, whatever he calls it, to the floor, the moonsault, senton, I agree, all really cool stuff that for a 20-year-old, you're going just like, what incredible body control this guy has for that age and that level of experience. And I thought because of all of that, how they worked that first section of the match, the final minutes of the match, they start going more 50-50 and Pac starts getting in more offense and going on a run. It doesn't feel like they're abandoning the story of the match. It actually felt earned to me. Like the guy who was taking a beating is finally gaining the momentum. He's stringing some moves together. There's a sequence fairly deep into the match where Roddy is throwing chops and Pac is just ducking each one, and each time he fires back with a forearm, and the crowd's going wild for it. And part of that, I think, is probably how hard they're hitting, which we can't really hear on the DVD, but it seems apparently they're fairly hard forearms. And I think part of it, again, is that they worked the match where a sequence like that didn't feel arbitrary. It felt like, oh, this young underdog, this local guy, is making a comeback after getting some really pasted at points early on in the match. And even the finish felt fitting to me, where Pac had been doing these big high-risk moves all match. Late in the match, he started hitting a lot of them, and he finally crash and burns on a dive off the top. And there's not some big long back or forth sequence. Roddy just destroys him with a sick kick right after he crash and burns. He hits one of the more impactful Tiger drivers I've seen him hit in a while that wasn't a Tiger Driver 91 or on a barricade. He just really threw him down hard. And it's over. And I get what you're saying, that we now in the modern days we expect, like, we let a guy have a show stealing match by kind of taking every shackle off of them and letting them go real fast paced right from the start and do everything they can and get like even Steven the whole way. And this was much more, you having to work from below. And I think he did a lot to impress. I think by the end, I think this does not come off as a squash. I think he looked good, and I think the crowd was going wild for him after the match. But I can see why others might want a different way. To me, that's why I like this match as much as I did. In terms of flaws, I would say that while being incredible in terms of the things he could do as a 20-year-old, there are a few moments where you see some daylight on some of Pac's moves in this match. His precision isn't what it would be, I would say, maybe later in his career, but at the same time, that might be what I talked about earlier, which is this is a show where Ring of Honor seemed so hesitant to use the hard cam shot only when possible. When they absolutely had to. Maybe they are certain more unforgiving camera angles that if they were shooting this match anywhere else wouldn't have caught, and you wouldn't have seen any daylight on stuff. But overall, I wouldn't quite call this 4-star. I would agree with you. Like, it's a very good match. I'd say like 3 3/4 stars. It was my favorite match of the show up to this point. I thought this was a good showing for a very young Pac. And this is the kind of match where, remember that promo Roddy did right when he won the FIP title, where he did a promo where he was like, I'm going to raise the FIP title's prestige by doing like show-stealing matches on Ring of Honor shows with it. That hasn't really come to fruition, and this wasn't quite a show-stealer, but I did feel like this is the kind of match I feel like that reign's been needed more of, where you're like, oh, this is a pretty darn good match. And yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. But
and like I said, I think it was very good, and I think psychologically it's extremely sound. But it did stand out to me how different it was than what probably they would have done now in terms of letting Pac loose a little bit more. And I thought of it in comparison to the first Pac match that I saw, which was his match against El Generico at, I think it was All-Star Weekend in late 2006 in PWG. And that was a lot more of like a balls to the wall match with both guys. And this wasn't exactly that. And I'm not necessarily saying it was worse, but I think that match did leave a bigger impression on the people that saw it than this one did.
And it's interesting how wrestling has swung, right? Because what's the big complaint a lot of times now on shows when a top star, at least in AEW, wrestles like a lower level guy, which is, oh, they went too even, too 50-50. They were more concerned with having like a generous match where both guys look good and where it was exciting. It was back and forth the whole way. Then, now people are kind of calling for the opposite. They kind of want to see more of, I just want to see Swerve Strickland, like just kill a guy in 4 minutes if he's not on his level in the booking.
Well, I think also with modern day AEW, you kind of get critiques from like both directions to the point where it's kind of hard to win. Like, it really depends on who you're asking in that situation. There are plenty of people that would probably say the opposite, right? Like, it kind of depends on like what perspective that critique is coming from, and also, maybe like where that match is taking place. It's a little bit different building up somebody in TV wrestling versus, doing what ROH purports to do, which is produce a show that people are supposed to spend money on every time out in this era.
And, it's not always necessarily even a modern thing, I guess, like kind of criticizing my own point, because, Ric Flair at times was known to give job guys a fair bit in just the interest of being entertaining, So, it's not unheard of that guys in different eras would just decide, you know what, I just want to do more because I want to do more. But after the match, the crowd quickly starts a bring back Pac chant. So maybe that tells
yeah. There you go. That answers the question, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's not bring back Pac. So bring back Pac.
The fans in the chicken outfits were saying that. Bring back Pac. There's that whole chicken section in the crowd. They do raise chicken. They do raise chickens in England, just so you know.
It's weird that they never cut to that section. It's crazy.
I saw,
but they were there.
Wait, was I hallucinating? Maybe.
Matt, you ate bad chicken.
I'm a vegetarian, Trevor.
Yeah. For Matt, all chicken is bad chicken.
That's right.
And he's a better man for it. But So after the match, after the bring back Pac chant, Roddy puts Pac in the stronghold until Delirious chases him out of the ring, continuing the Delirious is chasing after Roddy every show now since Roddy concussed him or Delirious gets the crowd chanting for Pac, and he helps him recover. Pac gets a big ovation. So a very successful night for Pac. But again, he only gets 3 more matches in Ring of Honor in this era, and we'll explore those matches. And then, by the next year, he's well on his way to being like a longtime Dragon Gate regular, maybe like the most decorated, beloved foreign wrestler in Dragon Gate history. So he will find his place pretty quickly in wrestling. But we then join Jimmy Jacobs backstage in front of that brick wall again. He notes that he pinned BJ Whitmer tonight, but says that wins and losses are hollow and moot. Lacey wanted him to take Colt or BJ out, and tonight it didn't happen. He just won the match. He didn't take them out. Jimmy screams for ref. Todd Sinclair comes running. Jimmy tells Sinclair he needs to tell Whitmer to come down here to the basement right now and be ready to fight. So 2 more matches happen between this and then, so it takes them a while to find them.
Didn't it kind of make you want for the next show to, instead of a Falls Count Anywhere match, to feature a boiler room brawl?
That wasn't like an interesting, like dingy brick wall lined basement.
Yeah.
I'm talking about exploring the space. I would like to see them explore. That's Trevor Dame 2025. Explore the space. So, so anyway, we're going to the semi-main event, the ROH World Tag Team Title match. Naruki Doi and Shingo defeat the Briscoes, who were attempting to make their first defense after just winning the tag team titles. They lose them here in 22 minutes, 40 seconds, when Shingo pinned Mark Briscoe with what I believe back then they called the Last Falconry, but it eventually changed its name to the Last of the Dragon. So a big title change, big shocking upset. I would say one of the bigger upsets we've probably seen on Through the Years. What did you think about this match?
I thought that this match did something interesting, which was they took the Briscoes formula that we've maybe criticized at times, where it's just like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and they elevated it by just like greatly accelerating it with Dragon Gate style pacing. And I think that it turned this into a pretty great match, honestly. It was not the most sophisticated or smoothest match you'll ever see, but the pace was so cool and the crowd heat got so great and the Briscoes really stepped up. Like, they never have had to work a match this fast before, at least not in ROH that we've had to review. And I also thought that this is the first time where really Shingo got to show everything that he could do in ROH, because we saw Shingo in some big tag team matches with, like, he teamed with Sema against Seidel and Daniels. But I think with the combination of the opponents being the Briscoes instead of Seidel and Daniels, and also Doi being his partner, a bit younger and a bit faster, I think it really allowed Shingo to step up his game. So I thought, to me, he was the star of this match. And it got to the point where it was one of those Dragon Gate style matches where it was almost too fast paced for me to keep up with writing down all the big moves. I wrote down some of them, which I'll try to get through to. But just to start out, first of all, did you notice, am I crazy, or was Kerry Silkin taking pictures at ringside? Or someone that just looked like him? I don't know, but
he was, and I've seen that before, like on recent shows. It seems like he's kind of helped out, and I think at one point you even see someone's like someone's like showing him how to use like helping him with the camera or something. So I don't know if they just decided that normally they because wasn't Mary Kate their usual photographer there? I think she was there.
I think I saw her, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I noticed that too, but I don't know if that's a recent trend that Kerry's just decided I'm also going to take pictures or what. Yeah.
Okay, just wondering. So one thing I noticed, the Briscoes have brought the Confederate flag back to the UK, but the UK fans still love them for whatever reason. But yeah, I thought the match started out pretty basic but fast. The crowd was very excited when Doi got tagged in. Actually, they were really excited to see Naruki. Doi, and the double chops by the Briscoes to Doi sounded very painful, and they beeled him very far out of the corner. I thought that Shingo's strikes early on stood out, and he pops the crowd big by taking Mark down with repeated headbutts, going back to what we were talking about earlier with the headbutts. Um, they take turns double teaming each other. Eventually, Shingo starts firing up after a series of shots from Mark, but he eventually succumbs and falls down. And then he ducks a double clothesline and ends up with a DDT slash side Russian leg sweep combo on both the Briscoes. There's a spot where Doi gets tagged in. He's on fire. He ducks a J clothesline and immediately topes Mark on the floor. In the ring, Shingo takes over on Jay and gets some submission holds, including a crippler crossface. And Jay makes the ropes there. The Dragon Gate team hang Mark up in the Tree of Woe, and they lean Jay against him. And Doi does a running senton into Jay, who goes into Mark, and the crowd pops big for that one. There's a cool spot where Shingo holds up Jay so Doi can hit a springboard senton. And when Doi covers, Mark has to basically fight and race around Shingo in order to make the save. And I like that struggle to try and make the save and almost like the race that they had to have. When Mark gets tagged in, he does his hot tag sequence, springboard dropkick, redneck kung fu, Michinoku driver on Doi. He then immediately runs up the ropes and it's a shooting star press onto Shingo, which the crowd loves, but it's a little bit of an omen for something that happens the next time these two teams wrestle in a very kind of unfortunate way. But here, he hits the move perfectly and the crowd goes crazy. Then in the ring, Jay and Doi are trading forearms. The Doi comes off the middle rope and drop kicks Jay right into a back suplex by Shingo. Mark comes in and hits the springboard splash, gets a 2 count. Then Jay and Mark do the double rope, the top rope leg drop / sidewalk slam combo on Shingo for 2. Then Doi comes off the middle rope to leg drop Mark while he's draped over Shingo's knees. Then Doi German suplexes Mark inside out for 2 as Jay saves Mark. The Briscoes go for their combo splashes, but Shingo cuts off Jay and Doi gets his knees up on Mark's shooting star press. And then Shingo superplexes Jay. Doi comes off the top rope on him, but Jay kicks out, which gets a big ROH chant. In one of the more, I'd say, mainly the most awkward spot of the match, I think, was Shingo accidentally clotheslines Doi when Doi tries to German suplex Jay, but Jay ducks. The spot was a little too telegraphed because you see them ducking a little bit early before they get moved into position, which I thought was, I don't know, it just made it a little too obvious, but that I think was the only time in the match where the seams kind of showed. After that, they went back into fast-paced stuff. Jay sends Shingo over the top rope, and they hit a total elimination on Doi and the double-team neckbreaker. Then they go for a springboard doomsday, but Shingo pulls down Mark, and Doi rolls up Jay for a 2 count. Then Jay does a military press Death Valley driver on Doi. Shingo makes the save. And this is the point where I'd say they're definitely at another level of near falls from what we usually see. And the crowd's really going crazy. Doi blocks the Jay driller. And Shingo knocks Mark off the top rope and lariats Jay. Gets a 2 count on that. Shingo then lariats Mark as he springboards off the top rope, which I thought was a really well-timed spot. Then Shingo hits the neck breaker on Mark off his shoulders for 2. Then Shingo hits a running knee, gets a 2 count on that, and Jay makes the save. Then Jay pulls Doi out of the ring, and Mark goes for the cutthroat driver on Shingo, and Shingo fights out, eventually hits the blood fall, and gets the shock win, which the crowd goes insane for. This match was all about the action, and we've seen a lot of Briscoes matches that I think were all about the nonstop action, but I thought this one was just fast enough paced and got to another level that it elevated it above a lot of the other matches. I don't think it's my favorite Briscoes match that we've seen recently, but I do think it was definitely better than the match they had against Sydal and Daniels the week before. And I'd say it's in the upper tier of Briscoes matches we've seen in this current run.
First, I just want to say, you said when you said you said about the crowd, they were really excited to see Naruki. You said in such a cute way, and it just started me thinking that's like a Studio Ghibli film. They were really excited to see Naruki, nominated for best foreign language film. But
thank you.
It was great. But I would say I completely agree with you on pretty much everything you said there. Like you were saying about how we've discovered on rewatching this year of the Briscoes, the formula they were kind of in this era. It's something I knew at the time as those matches happened, but it's been really reinforced by rewatching them for the podcast. that for those who haven't heard, like it's the way the Briscoes worked in this era, and by this era I mean like when they returned to Ring of Honor in 2006 and the next year or two at least, these matches have a very set style in this era, which is little to no character work or story, no build usually to the big hot tags, just action from start to finish, a lot of your move, my move, a lot of tags, and a lot of those matches I find the Briscoes, the thing I would always say is the Briscoes start at a 7 out of 10 and basically just stay at a 7 out of 10 for the whole match. And on one hand, that's really admirable because they're such just a hardworking team that they kind of never downshift. But staying in that second to last gear of action with nothing else and no variation more than a couple times sometimes has left me coming away going, okay, that was a good match, but numbing. I've had that with a bunch of Briscoes matches. But the big thing about the Briscoes in this era, like what separates those good but numbing to the great ones are that final 5 minutes or more. Because a lot of times in the big Briscoes matches, the final 5 minutes or more kick into like overdrive and they get even bigger and more fast paced. And it's kind of like, then it gets elevated because instead of just being that 7 out of 10 for most or all of the way, it's a 7 out of 10 that all of a sudden jumps to a 9 or a 10 for the final stretch. And to me, what turns them from those good but numbing to great but thrilling is how long and how big those final stretch runs of those matches go. So I say all that to say this is a match where I felt like they started that 7 out of 10 immediately, and I was getting that good but numbing feeling. And to me, there was a key spot where that changed, where where the Briscoes go for that move where they do it occasionally, where they almost do like the demolition decapitation setup where Jay has them in an opponent in the backbreaker thing in position, and Mark does like the split-legged twisting like moonsault or leg drop, whatever, depending on how he hits it. He doesn't always hit it cleanly, and they hit it here and the crowd goes nuts. And the energy to me just changed from that moment, from the crowd and from the wrestlers from that moment on. Now, for the next 2 minutes, the match doesn't, in terms of the pace of what they're doing, it doesn't kick into a higher gear because the Dragon Gate team does a bit of a couple submissions. But I felt like the tone had changed. And if you don't count those 2 minutes just to when they really start moving faster, I would say that what that last gear of this match, it isn't the last 5 minutes, it's the last like 10 to 12 minutes of this match. So that's a big difference. I think that's what really separates this match from a lot of the other Briscoes matches of the last year. Like, this is a big, dumb Briscoes match in the best way. It's two teams throwing bombs back and forth, the crowd going wild for them. There's moments where the crowd bursts into applause the way you would right after a great match concludes, and the match is not even done. Like, it's the level of match where you feel like you're seeing something truly great while they still have more things to give you. This is a show where I felt like we had seen on the undercard so far multiple matches where I felt like, okay, they did good, but they didn't give their all. And this is a match where I feel like you got more than you expected, where all four guys were giving their absolute A-game efforts. I thought the Briscoes here were very good, their usual selves, but on the high end of it. But I felt like Shingo and Doi were even better. Like, especially Doi, everyone wanted to see Naruki, and I felt like he was the MVP of the match with his energy. I also thought, like,
I'd still go with Shingo, but I respect your call.
Yeah, you know what? I wouldn't. I think that's a good choice too, because I thought Shingo continues to feel like he's really starting to get into his groove in ROH. I thought one interesting little wrinkle I picked up from on the last couple of shows is there are times against CJ Otis in the four-way on the last show, and then here, where his opponents will want to pick him up immediately after Shingo takes a move, and Shingo resists and wants to sell a little bit more. And usually he doesn't make them wait very long. Like, if you watch this match, I forget if it's Jay or Mark, one of them tries to pick Shingo up after Shingo took a move, and Shingo doesn't let the guy, and the Briscoe clearly doesn't expect that, and so he just tries to pick him up again, and then this time Shingo comes up for him. But I thought it's really interesting because we were starting to enter that era of wrestling where the pace is getting faster and faster to the point where there's going to be a lot more sequences in matches where guys don't have time to sell because the emphasis is going to be on taking the move, immediately getting up and getting position to the next move, because we're about pushing like the pace of wrestling to a bleeding edge. And so it stands out when a guy like Shingo's like, hey, let this breathe for a couple seconds. I want to sell this for a couple more seconds. Let me stay down for another beat. And you're seeing that less and less even in this era. But I do feel like Shingo was getting into a groove here because you were starting to see the stiffer, more power-based offense Shingo brings to matches like this. And I feel like in these multi-mans or tags where a lot of the other guys are more lightweight guys, are doing a lot more fast flying, what he brings becomes a much more welcome, like refreshing counterpoint to what's going on. Like in these matches, his offense just feels a little heavier and harder hitting than what everyone else in the ring is doing. Like there's a great sequence here where Shingo just grabs, I think, Mark Briscoe, and he throws a million headbutts on him until they collapse. And like no one else in this match is bringing that flavor to the match. Or late in the match where Shingo just murders a man with a lariat, and then shortly after, one of the Briscoes, he is jumping, and in midair he just swats him out of the air with another lariat, like just swing his arm like it's a dang baseball bat. And again, I think he's really finding a groove of where his stuff fits in exciting matches like this. Shingo winning at the end is just an amazing crowd reaction, like you said. It's a shock crowd reaction, but we've seen a lot of shock crowd reactions where there's a shock crowd reaction where there's a brief pause first for the crowd has to kind of take a beat to assess what happened, and then depending on whether they like it or not, they might even give you a mixed or negative reaction. This is completely different. This is like you can tell they're surprised, but it's instant joy. They don't take a beat to think about. It's like, holy shit, this happened. We saw a title change. We didn't think these guys were going to win. It's probably one of the bigger crowd reactions we've heard in recent Through the Years memory, maybe one of the bigger ones we've just heard, period. And I think you gotta give credit to Gabe for the booking here. Like at first blush, it might seem kind of crazy to make your top tag team, the Briscoes, chase for gaining the titles for an entire year, have them finally win them, and then the very next show lose them. But then you realize they're going to use this to give you a big impromptu Briscoe versus Briscoe match on the very next show. It allows ROH to give the UK something that is a surprise and a big title change on a weekend where the world champion isn't there. And reading live reports at the time, I did see a couple fans say, oh, I was disappointed that the world champion didn't come on the show. So I think it's valuable that they can at least say, hey, we gave you a title change and a big one that you didn't expect. And also knowing the fact that the Dragon Gate guys were going to be the next weekend ring. We're going to be in for the next weekend Ring of Honor Ram because it was going to be the WrestleMania weekend again. They knew they could change the titles right back. And on top of all of that, I think it's good for promotions to occasionally sprinkle in a surprising short title reign just to keep fans on their toes. Like, I prefer longer title reigns in general. You don't and maybe shouldn't have to do this very often. But I do feel like if rarely, like every few years, you slip in one short title reign, it does enough to keep fans on their toes so that for the first few months of every other title reign, hopefully the fans aren't thinking every match like, oh, this guy just won a title, so there's no way he's losing this match. And so I felt like it checked a lot of boxes. And so I thought it was really good booking in that sense. I feel like it doesn't – the Briscoes get their title reign, starting in a couple shows with no hit to their momentum except for something you alluded to, which we'll talk about on that show that does kind of hurt for a bit. And I completely agree with you, Matt, of that the Dragon Gate guys, they just fit. I feel like this was the Briscoes doing the kind of match they've been trying to have for the last year at a high end. And I agree with you, it's maybe not their absolute best that we've seen from them since their comeback to Ring of Honor, but I would put it in that pantheon of great ones. It's somewhere in the group with the Aries and Strong UK tag, with the Kings of Wrestling final battle match, with, the Steen and Generico. It's in that group. I don't know where I would place it. Probably not right at the top. I would give this match at least 4 stars. I'd say this is an outright great match, maybe even 4.25. I think it's a great tag match. And I guess the thing I was wondering is, like, were the Briscoes, like, how would they have fit in Dragon Gate? Because at this point, they had just started working in Noah. They had a very brief junior tag title run in Noah, and they were this year and next year they'd go on 2 tours each year in Noah. But kind of watching this match, I felt like it was kind of just this discovery of, for the kind of style the Briscoes wanted to work, the kind of matches they wanted to have, I felt like a lot of the Dragon Gate guys are actually like the perfect fit for them. More than Noah guys, more than Ring of Honor guys even.
Yeah, I mean, I think this match proves they would have done great in Dragon Gate. Certainly as good as a lot of the other guys ROH guys that went at the time. I mean, I think they would have done great anywhere they went. And, yeah, I mean, like I said, the Dragon Gate's the one with the most, I think probably the most demanding in terms of what you were expected to have to be able to do athletically, and I think the Briscoes proved that they could keep up with that for sure.
Yeah, like the Briscoes on here at this point were just so much about just relentlessly never really taking a break and giving a hard work every single night. And I think that's a roster that would there would be, that's a roster more than any, even though a lot of wrestlers of the top wrestlers in different places could, but I think it has the highest percentage of wrestlers that could probably have just kept up with them, and done the kind of matches they wanted to have at this point. But we'll go to the Observer quickly. Dave wrote about this match. The idea was to put the belt on the Japanese team to get press in Japan to help Ring of Honor sell tickets for the 2 shows they're running in Japan later this year. Unlike in the UK, which is a hot wrestling market for major league stuff, Japan is so much that the shows by no means are guaranteed successes. So that's like a whole other interesting reason why they put the belts on the Dragon Gate team, is just they wanted to get some I guess best for the Japanese shows. And I guess that's part of a theme, because the Briscoes held the Noah tag titles early in the year, the junior titles, and lost them on the same tour. Seidel wins the Dragon Gate title, and then the mid card one, the Open Brave Gate, and then loses it back quickly. And then you got Morishima holding the ROH title. So they're doing a lot of cross pollination in 2007 of the titles with their 2 partner promotions, I guess, to try and give each side some credibility in the other country. Yeah, and after the match, Shingo and Doi celebrate, and they leave the ring as the camera keeps cutting to a stunned and crestfallen Jay Briscoe, who looks like his team just lost the Super Bowl. The crowd chants for them as Jay takes the mic. He angrily notes this was their first title defense, and he cuts a promo we can barely understand over the blown-out echoey PA system from recaps. I think he also references that they lost their Noah Junior tag titles on the first defense there, too, so he's like, what's going on with us? So Jay says he thinks it's time that the Briscoes themselves man up, and he proposes to Mark that tomorrow night it's Jay versus Mark, one night only, and a big pop for that. And Mark immediately agrees. So yeah,
Mark was so excited. He was like, hell yeah! Like, it didn't take him more than a second to agree to that one.
And I remember this is one of those moments where I remember reading like the results at the time on the ROH message board and being like so pumped, like, wait, they're just throwing in Briscoe versus Briscoe for like the first time in ROH in years. Like I was like, that's a big throw in. And I thought that was just really cool to read about, that like out of nowhere, you're just getting Jay versus Mark again. So that's a nice little bonus to the fans too, right? Like, especially if you had bought tickets to both nights, like, hey, we got you. We're over delivering on this second night
for sure.
But we then get a 5th year festival video package devoted to the World Tag Team titles. We get highlights from a lot of the big tag title matches in the last year, and the standard 5th year festival to be continued graphic to end. And that brings us to the main event. Samoa Joe defeated Nigel McGuinness versus Ref Stoppage in 22 minutes 53 seconds when he made Nigel pass out on the rear naked choke. Usually when I watch wrestling, I can separate the booking from the match quality. I can say, hey, this match was good, but the booking was bad, or vice versa. This is a match where it was harder for me to separate my emotions about the match from my emotions about the booking. And this is probably the strongest emotional reaction I've had to a Ring of Honor match in a while. So we've talked about on the Samoa Joe farewell tour how even though we don't have confirmation from any source, it seems pretty likely that TNA restricted how Joe could lose on the way out. We based that on the fact that when big stars left Ring of Honor, Gabe generally liked to book them strong, but have them do one key job on the way out. And here, if Joe was going to do one key job on the way out, there were 2, possibly 3 really great candidates on this farewell tour. He could have lost to Morishima on Morishima's ROH debut, which would have been a huge way to get Morishima off to a hot start, especially when he was booked the next night to win the world title. Instead, Joe beat him clean. Davey Richards had been losing a lot lately, but he was clearly one prospect ROH was really into. Could have been a big win for Davey. Joe beats him clean. And here Nigel, who at this point already felt like he was probably earmarked to be the guy who would one day dethrone Morishima for the world title, he really could have benefited from being Joe in his home country, and instead he loses. And the only loss Joe suffers on this farewell tour is in a tag match in Chicago, and he does directly get pinned there by Nigel in that tag. But looking at all those matches in Joe's farewell tour, you cannot tell me that if Gabe had his choice of Joe losing one match, if it was up to him, that he would have picked Joe's loss to be spent in a tag match that would quickly be forgotten rather than Morishima or this match here. So this match starts, and I thought these guys on this night were putting on their A game. Like, Most of this match is stuff we've seen from these two before, stuff we've seen them do against each other before, but it's pretty much just their best stuff. It's like their greatest hits. It's in front of a crowd that's really hot for it. There's just a bit more energy behind it, a bit more of a big fight feel to it, and maybe some of the fat or meandering you'd see in other matches, like in different settings. On this night, they're not doing that. I don't know if these guys have like that A+ chemistry against each other. I don't know if they've ever had a match that just felt like completely, and I don't think they had it here either, but it just did feel like it was like the best version of what they've done against each other. But then relatively early on, Nigel hurts his groin. I don't know about you, Matt. I don't know if you noticed when it happened. I first noticed it when you can hear Nigel takes the STO from Joe in the corner, and you can hear Nigel yell shit right after that really loud, and you can see him then start talking to Joe after another quick sequence, and then he's grabbing his groin. And then very quickly after that, Nigel does his usual kick to the back, forearm to the chest combo in the corner, and you could see him feel the pain in his groin right after he does that, and you can see him say, "Oh my God," like he's like in a very real way, he is in pain. And for the rest of the match, you're watching a guy clearly gutting his way through something that is killing him. This is not the recent Jimmy Ray versus Joe match where Ray breaks his jaw and you would never know it until you heard about it after. This is, you can see Nigel is swearing out loud. He's talking to Joe more than he probably would otherwise. He's grabbing at his groin. He's limping. He's groaning in pain in a way that doesn't feel or sound like wrestling selling. But he does gut through the match. And then we get to this key spot late where Joe hits the muscle buster on the ring apron. And I thought that's a really smart booking because Joe broke out the ring apron muscle buster, I think for the first time, at least in Ring of Honor, a couple shows earlier against Davey Richards. And that felt like RH's attempt to put over Davey Richards and losing, that Joe had to pull out a super rare variation of his finisher to beat Davey. And here Nigel takes the move and he sells it like he's dead. He lies on the floor for a long time. Joe gets back in the ring. Nigel's still on the floor. All the refs rush to help Nigel and they start to slowly help him to the back. And Joe gets on the mic, and although the PA system kind of sucks, we can kind of make out that Joe is paying respect to Nigel, that the match, he's acting like it's seemingly over, and he wants Nigel to shake his hand. And Joe keeps calling to Nigel as he's being held to the back, and Nigel is sounding like he's barely conscious. And Joe gets angrier and angrier that Nigel's not coming back to the ring to shake his hand, which honestly kind of makes Joe seem like an asshole because Nigel is like selling like he's barely dead, like he can't get back in the ring, he's hurt. And so eventually Joe just goes, "You're a British pussy, get back in this ring, shake my hand." And something amazing at that moment happens. This crowd, which I would probably say had been at best 50-50 and at worst 60-40 or 70-30 for Joe the whole match, turns on Joe in that moment and swings to what I would say would be like 80-20 for Nigel. This crowd basically goes through what I went watching the Danielson-Nigel match here in Liverpool 1 year earlier, where I went in cheering for Nigel's opponent, and the way the match worked led me to a moment in the match where I was like, "Oh my God, no, I want Nigel to beat this guy now." They matched to take like the most beloved star RH had ever had in its up to this point in its history on his farewell weekend in the company, and 3/4 of the way into this match, on a dime, they made the crowd want to see him lose. I thought it was an amazing piece of booking if Nigel wins, which he doesn't. There's this great angle where Nigel's standing at the entrance. He's propped up by the refs, and the camera's right behind him. It's over his shoulder, shooting over it, and it's pointed towards the ring where Joe is waiting for him. And well, I normally hate when fans compare wrestling to movies, as if being a movie is wrestling's greatest, highest form of achievement, rather to be an inferior version of something else rather than like its own thing. I thought this was like a movie in the best way. It just, the way it was framed where Joe's like kind of washed out in the light and he's just way off in the distance, and Nigel starts struggling back to the ring, and instead of shaking Joe's hand when he gets in the ring, he slaps him in the fucking face. And from there we just have this incredible finishing run where Nigel takes another muscle buster, but he kicks out. Nigel kicks out of a different move later at 1, and both of those things are things I would say you should almost never do except in your biggest occasions, like your company's equivalent of WrestleMania, and I would say this qualifies. That's one of the biggest compliments I think I can pay this match, is I feel like those moves are earned by the time they build up to them. There's a couple great near falls for Nigel at this point where it feels like they would have been perfect underdog Nigel wins. Like he goes for the rebound lariat, but in a nod to his past, which really eagle-eyed Ring of Honor viewers or through the years listeners would know that the original rebound lariat for a few shows was not a lariat. It was a rebound schoolboy, which he does here, which gets a huge near fall. And then later on when Joe gets the rear naked choke on, Nigel flips over for a near fall that also would have been a great way for him to win. But instead, Joe just keeps getting back to the choke. The crowd is chanting, "Please don't tap." And Nigel just taps out, and not even for a long, pretty quickly. And this crowd, which had maybe started the match 60-40 for Joe, which turned to 80-20, are now audibly disappointed. Like, there's groans, there's boos. They quickly give ways to cheers because they still love Joe. But over the course of a single match, they managed to turn this crowd from probably kind of preferring by a little bit to see Joe win to desperately wanting to see Nigel win to then snatching it away from them in the course of a few minutes. And I can talk more about the booking after, but I've droned on too much. But I have I think most of this match is a good to very good kind of Joe Nigel greatest hits. I feel like the emotion from the Muscle Buster on elevates this to like at least 4 stars. And then the booking almost makes me want to take that away because I was so sad for Nigel and disappointed, even though I know why ROH got to this point. But I would still probably say this is a 4-star great match. But I've never quite seen a match like this, Matt, where it took me on that particular ride of emotions.
I think I'm a bit more forgiving of the booking than you are. Actually, I know I am a lot more forgiving of the booking than you are, in the sense that I'm not upset about it at all because I know their hands were tied. Like, I feel like they did every single thing they could to give Nigel the moral victory, if that makes sense. Like, mm-hmm. they made him as gallant and as brave and gutsy as they possibly could. They gave him some big near falls. I guess the only thing they maybe could have done is after he got back in the ring, given him like a couple more minutes of really plausible near falls instead of a couple quick roll-up teases, maybe some more lariats or something like that. But, Joe had to win for political reasons. We knew that. Obviously, by now, I think most people knew that. They wanted to put Nigel over. I'd say you'll talk about the post-match later. They make that about as much of a passing of the torch, without even being subtle about it as they possibly could. That spot with the Muscle Buster on the apron, I thought was maybe a little heavy-handed in terms of him getting carried out and Joe getting on the mic. But then I realized, since there's no countouts in ROH, that was the only way to make that dramatic. They couldn't do the dramatic count on the floor because they didn't have that. So they had to manufacture it in a way by having him have to be almost walked all the way to the entrance. And then Joe had to come up with some way to motivate Nigel to bring himself back into the ring. I agree with you that the part before the big Muscle Buster spot, I thought that was like the best version of them, to the point where I actually, I did notice the groin injury, but it wasn't really that distracting to me. Like, I know about it. The announcers mentioned it, as Gabe always makes sure that the announcers have this keen sixth sense of exactly the specificity of a person's real injury. But I thought that the work was good enough and the drama was good enough that could have easily just been somebody selling in a match as opposed to something that was detracting from the match, if that makes sense. But the crowd energy was great. I still, like I said, the near falls didn't reach this level, and the psychology didn't reach this level where I thought that this was some all-time great match or anything. I'd put it probably around 4.25 myself, but what great drama. And yes, in a perfect world, Nigel would have won, and that would have elevated the match even more. But knowing that they couldn't do that, I thought they did everything they could possible to protect Nigel and make him come away from this match as a bigger star than he came into it. And I think it worked. I think it worked. I think the crowd reactions afterwards were effective. And obviously we saw what happened to Nigel. Like, I don't think this hurt Nigel in a bit to lose to Joe, even though it would have helped him more to win.
Well, first I want to say, I think you made a great point too about like, I kind of had that same thought as you on the Muscle Buster on the apron, where doing the long drawn out, like Nigel's done and Joe getting on the mic. I, like you, was kind of like, this is a little overly dramatic, but I think what made it work for me was just the effect it had on the crowd. Like, it worked so well on the crowd that almost like I was more into how it affected the crowd than what they were actually doing, if that makes sense. Like, I love how they managed to swing the crowd with that. Like, it could not have worked better if what they were going for is like, let's get as much of this crowd for Nigel in one of Joe's last 2 matches in the company as we can. And it as Brits might say, it went down a treat, Matt. But I don't even know if that's a thing they say. But
I've definitely never heard it before, but I guess it's possible.
Paul
to
F.
say
Tompkins probably said that pertaining to be Andrew Lloyd Webber. So that's my culture. But so this is my thought on the booking. I agree. Again, I agree with you. You are completely right, which is ROH's hands were tied, and they tried as much as they could here to put Nigel. And I think you're in a difficult position with when you think if you think about ROH's position, which is you have Joe for a final series of matches. You get to promote them as Joe's farewell tour. Do you not book him in dream matches and fresh matches that people want to see that will probably sell tickets and DVDs just because you don't want those people losing? Do you put them in matches against like guys that people won't be as excited about, but you are more okay with them losing?
I don't think this is a dilemma. It's ROH. You just have a great match, and it doesn't matter if you win or lose in the end. Like, that's how I feel, and I think that's how it worked out.
Yeah, like maybe I'm the Dave Meltzer, because I remember making fun of Dave Meltzer when we covered Joe versus Kobashi, where Dave around the time of Joe versus Kobashi was like, oh, Joe can't lose to Kobashi, that'll hurt him, but Kobashi has to win. And we were like, you know what, if they have a great match, clearly history bore this out, like Joe will be more over than ever. And I get that you're kind of saying that here. I guess the only thing I'm saying is maybe it's because I know the future, which is Nigel, I don't feel like ever gets his big signature win in the UK. Like last year, he loses to Danielson, and I know Danielson had to win based on all their plans. I don't think Nigel getting a short title run before dropping to Homicide would have worked out for anybody involved there. So, but the way they worked it was so beautiful. It was such a great moment. Halfway through, I kind of wanted that, but I get why he had to lose that. Then the next night he's hurt and he wins in a random meaningless tag match on the undercard. So he didn't get a big win in 2006. 2007 he loses here. I get that he has to lose here because Joe can't lose because of the TNA stuff. And then the next night, I do get that he does beat Jimmy Rave in a big feud-ending blow-off match, but it's not the main event, and it can't be because Joe's farewell is the main event. And with all due respect to Jimmy Rave, because I'm a Jimmy Rave fan, it was against Jimmy Rave. Like I feel like 2 years in a row now, Nigel has been against one of the pillars of Ring of Honor, one of the top guys. And in both those matches, they got in the crowd to a point where you wanted to see him win, and then they snatched it away and had him lose clean. And knowing that they don't ever come back to the UK during Nigel's run, and he doesn't get that big win. Like, to me, if the plan, and I have no idea if this was or was not, if there was any idea of maybe we come back later in the year and that's where Nigel wins the world title from Morishima, I feel like this is easier to take, because it's almost like, okay, we'll get you on the next one, right? But there is no next one. This is the last time. He doesn't get another match against Joe. He doesn't get to go back to the UK in a match that's as big as this for the Danielson match. And it is one of those things where it's not so much that I'm angry at anybody. It's more just like I felt bad for Nigel, and I'm just disappointed by the pops in my head he could have had last year and this year, and how good those could have been for his career. And knowing how Nigel's world title reign goes through all sorts of circumstances, it is kind of like a what if, what if he got the win here?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been. I feel like none of us know what the counterfactual of reality would have been, but my hunch is it would have given him one more great moment in his career that he didn't have, but would not have changed the trajectory of everything else that happened. That's just my hunch, but who knows?
Yeah, and to be clear, I agree. Like this match did not hurt Nigel at all. If anything, it at worst he stayed the same, but at best it elevated him somewhat. And I just feel like if he had won, this crowd would have went even more nuts than they did for the semi-main event finish. They would have blown the roof off that place. It would have been an insane moment. I think fans would have had to have seen, and I think there would have been a material extra benefit for him to that. And I'm just disappointed that for him that he did not get that. But after the match, the crowd chants, "Thank you, Joe." Joe grabs the mic and he points to Nigel and says, "They'll be thanking somebody else soon." Joe says, "One thing we can all agree on is you never call a British man a pussy," which gets laughs from the crowd. Crowd's right back on Joe's side. Joe asks Nigel to get up, and Nigel does, and he gets a big ovation for doing that. Joe says the last few months he and Nigel have been at odds. Nigel chose Noah. Joe chose ROH, but the bottom line thing is Nigel chose the hard path. He got back in this ring, and God damn it, Joe knows he's leaving this company in good hands. Joe kneels down at this point over the ROH logo in the center of the ring, says that's what these three letters are about. They're not, the wrestlers here, they're not paid the most, they don't get the most recognition, but God damn it, they love professional wrestling and will do whatever it fucking takes to bring it to the world. Huge ROH chant at that. Joe says this is the perpetuation of tradition, wrestling in front of the most grateful fans in the world. Huge Joe chants. Joe says when he leaves, other men will stand up and fill the gaps and perpetuate the greatness of the sport. He really emphasizes that word of professional wrestling. Joe shakes Nigel's hand and tells him, that when he leaves, he's leaving all that to Nigel. And he says, and then he hugs Nigel. He raises his hand and he ends by saying, "This is Ring of Honor." Nigel holds open the ropes for Joe, and they leave together, arms over each other's shoulders before they pose together by the ring entrance. And this was just another great Joe farewell promo.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that the worst Joe farewell promo was the one he did in Chicago as the farewell to the U.S. fans, because this one was amazing.
Yeah, right. I was going to say I would say the only dud one we've seen from him. This is his sixth. This is his fifth one. This is his fifth farewell promo. The only one that was just meh was the Chicago one, and even that one, like you said, ironically, it's his final U.S. show, and that's the one where before the match he has like an emotional breakdown because the crowd cheers for him for like 90 seconds. But the promo was the one time where it felt like, oh, he's out of things to say. But then he comes right back here. Amazing promo, and obviously he had something new to work with, which is, like you said earlier, clearly the goal here was Joe's going to do everything he can. If I can't lose to this guy, I'm literally just going to say this is the guy that takes over for me. This is the guy that gets the keys to the car. And I thought it was a great at putting over Nigel. I thought it was one hell of a rah-rah speech that this crowd just ate up for Ring of Honor. And the visual even of them walking out together arm in arm, I thought, not arm in arm, but arms over shoulders.
Well, they were. I would say it was pretty close to arm in arm.
Yeah, and even just going back to the comments of the Q&A earlier, where Joe even said the Q&A, like, "Oh, Nigel's the future of Ring of Honor." Like, clearly full court press at this point to be like, Nigel is the guy. Get on board. We then cut to Jimmy Jacobs one more time in the brick-walled basement. He is screaming for BJ Whitmer to come down here. He does, and they proceed to brawl in almost total blackness in a corner of the basement before we see another fifth-year festival to be the continued graphic. So another great throwback vibe where we had the throwback video quality and the throwback mic quality, and we had the throwback backstage segment done in almost total darkness. Matt, that was the fifth-year festival, Liverpool. Who wins the Matt F. Trophy this time?
Oh, boy. Well, he might not have gotten the big win in the main event, but years later, he gets to take solace in the fact that Nigel McGuinness has finally won the Matt F. Trophy here at Fifth Year Festival Liverpool. I just thought his performance, his emotion, the gutsiness, the fact that he was injured and still gave such a great performance, the fact that he got the crowd to an emotional peak that we really don't see that often, and got to have the torch passed to him even in defeat. I think this is, I know you said he lost a really memorable moment, but I still think this is one of the crowning moments of his ROH career so far. And I think that the other person I was considering was Shingo, but I think the emotion of the main event made me say it had to be Nigel.
Yeah, and also working through the injury too, like just the degree. If we were doing like a figure skating scoring, like the degree of difficulty behind that performance, you'd get a good score there. So great choice. And so, yeah, about this show, I would say, it's like some shows, it's a tale of two halves. I would say the first half, everything before intermission up to Seidel, including Seidel and Delirious, was like all good but not great, and it didn't even really feel like they were trying to like blow the bloody barn doors off. But I felt like the back three matches are all very good to great. Great, really emotional crowd reactions in the final two matches and that post-match main event promo. And so, gotta be a recommended show. The atmosphere was great.
I think probably definitely one of the best 50-year festival shows. Probably I would say the second best of the ones that we've watched so far. And one of the better crowds that ROH has had in a long time. Probably the only crowd recently that I could think of that was, maybe better was the Final Battle crowd. Like, this was a really great crowd, and I'd say the show was very entertaining from beginning to end, even with some of the lesser matches, and definitely during the later matches.
Yeah, like sometimes we see a show where it's almost like the first half of the show is kind of a similar quality to the first half of this show, and it's almost like, well, if the second half is great, it's a great show, and if the second half is kind of meh, it's a meh show, and the second half really delivered here. So then you're like, well, then the whole show is good, because it's like you're happy with good going into great by the end. So, yeah, fun show, definitely recommended. Plugs through the years at gmail.com, THROH, if you want to write anything at all. Social media at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. We're also on Blue Sky at similar handles. You just have to plug in those handles and then .social.bluesky or whatever. If you want to see me say horrible things I regret, social media has been great for that for a month or two now. Join the train, screen cap it all. But
whenever he does it on this show, I just edit it out. So you have to.
We've only had to edit out one thing I've said. Well,
you have to go to that's all that you know about. You have to go to social media for the rest of it.
You want me to make horrible mistakes and embarrass myself without the Matt Feuerstein filter, which I wish I could have for my entire life and not just this podcast. Social media. Don't go to my social media. So next time on the show, we'll be back in the safe space where I get away from that. The 5th year festival finale. We'll reach the end of the 6-year, 5th year festival saga. Another show in the Liverpool, at the Olympia in Liverpool. I keep mixing up the words Olympia and Liverpool. And this is one of the more stacked cards we've seen in a long time. I mean, you got Jay versus Mark Briscoe. You got Joe versus Homicide in his farewell match on this run in ROH. You've got Shingo and Doi defending their tag titles against Davey Richards and Roderick Strong. You've got Pac against Matt Sydal. You've got Delirious and Cabana in a comedy match. It's just
Delirious and Cabana in a comedy match. That's a stacked lineup right there. No, but seriously, yes, I'm very much looking forward to 5th year festival finale. Yeah, that's all I'll say. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be one of the bigger shows we've done in a while. And we've done some big shows lately, so should be fun. Welcome to 2025. And so until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.